start off by saying Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So, Christy, are you with us online?
I am with you all in spirit, heart, and virtually.
Excellent. Welcome aboard. And I think, considering how many people we have online, why don't we kick it off tonight with the Zoom spiel?
This is my favorite part of the meeting. Hi, I'm Christy Anastasia. I'm on the planning board. I am Zooming in remote. We have been doing Zoom meetings for a while, and if you haven't attended a Zoom planning board meeting, you're in for a treat. What we ask folks to do is, if you can find your chat button somewhere, it might be on the top or the bottom, it looks like a little speak bubble. That is what we use to sign in. So if you go there, you can sign your name in there, and we can use that as a list of participants for this meeting. We do not use the chat for side questions or comments. If you have something to share with the rest of the group, please raise your real hand or your virtual hand and be recognized by the chair. Also, because I'm guessing there's a lot of participants in this meeting, looks like we have 21 right now, but it might creep up more. If you can keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking, that'll help with background noise. The town does have some fancy IT equipment in there that will kind of move around and change positions. So that should help with things. And I believe we can have almost 500 people on this meeting. We have an expanded license. So lots more people can join us this evening. And I think that's the Zoom spiel.
That is it. Thank you. So I'll make board introductions to myself. I'm William Hanley, chair. We've got Tracy Loftus-Keller in the room with us, and online we just heard from Christy Anastasia. We've got Meredith Randolph. Give us a big wave, Meredith.
We lost our video.
There she is, Meredith. And we've got Dave Ashmore up top. All right, and let's get going. And of course, we've got town council, James Collier, our town code enforcement, Kim Keene, and away we go. And Heidi Smallage. Heidi, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Sorry, I'm late.
No worries. It's good to have you. So tonight we've got a quarrying license application. It's a public hearing. It's quarrying license application or quarrying license permit 001-2014. Owner Harold McQuinn Incorporated. Operator Freshwater Stone and Brick. Agent is Steve Salisbury, Harrican Salisbury. Legal rep is Ed Bear from Redmond Winchell. Location is off the Crane Road in Hall Quarry. Tax map 7. Lot 75, zone is residential 1, and purpose is review the quarry license application. And I would wager that we're going to kick off the hearing tonight with a discussion about road standards. As from our last hearing on October 20th, just to remind everybody that the board essentially asked the applicant to come back with some more information, description, details on the road leading to the quarry. And with that, Ed, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we did submit additional detailed drawings. As you saw, we revised those drawings after they were critiqued by opponents. It's our position, and Steve Salisbury as well as Chip are here to talk to you tonight about any questions you have regarding the road design or the consequential stormwater alteration, if you will, the culverting around the cul-de-sac. The road meets the road standards of the subdivision ordinance. We don't believe that we need to request any waivers. You are certainly welcome to grant us any waiver from any deficiency if you find one to be inconsequential, although we don't think that you will find any to be inconsequential. So we have now provided you with a 50-foot wide road with an appropriate cul-de-sac ending, meeting all of the standards, which I think is what we were tasked with doing when we left here on the 20th. And there has been, we submitted with our first submission back in December, a consent from Mr. Musetti. As a precaution, I thought that you might want to have another consent since we revised the plans. I point out to you, however, that none of the revisions between December and now are on any of Musetti's land. All of the revisions that we made were on in the area of the cul-de-sac, not on or affecting Musetti's land whatsoever. That being said, Mr. Musetti is away on vacation. I don't know how you're going to get these to the remote board members. There's supposed to be some provision in your remote policy to do so. But we have the email exchange between Mr. Tadnev, who is Mr. Musetti's attorney in our office, which concludes with Mr. Tadnev saying, if you need to share a copy of my email relating Mr. Musetti's verbal approval of the revised plan with the board, please feel free to do so. So I'm giving you our email correspondence from the January 5th through January 12th that evidences his consent.
Mr. Chairman, could I just object for the record? This is late. He should have submitted this at certainly 30 days ago, but no later than 7 days ago. And I would request that the board not accept submissions tonight. The board voted at the October meeting to require the applicant to submit 30 days in advance and to ask for a waiver if they needed a waiver. And this is not in order to provide more information here tonight.
Can I ask why are you submitting this to us?
Because because one of the things that was discussed in October was Mr. Musetti's actual consent. The easement said that we had to obtain his consent, so we obtained his consent and we filed that with you in December. Since then, we revised the plan, but not on his land whatsoever. But I thought I would just confirm for you that he's okay with what he's done. Now, you don't have to accept it or not.
I don't think we can, Ed, and just in reason being is I'm circling back to the October 20th meeting. We went through this last time, and when the board actually had a motion on submittals, and where we had the board voted that we have 30 days before the meeting date, the submission, 14 days, any replies, 7 days before the meeting date, and then a brief rebuttal. So I think we technically can't accept this.
Well, I'd like it to be in the record. You don't have to accept it, but I want it to be in the record.
How does that work, James?
That's fine.
Yep.
Okay. Then, as long as I know that's in the record, and the record is pretty clear with our December filing that Mr. Musetti consented, and I'm representing to you that he consents to what we are presently discussing here tonight, but that none of the changes between December and now affected his property anyway. They didn't have to do that at all.
Just for the record, I do object again for putting more evidence in the record after the deadline. But
So that's it. If you want to hear from Mr. Salisbury concerning whether the road meets the standards, he's here to do that.
So let's, usually the protocol is we just make our round of introductory statements. It sounds like I just heard yours.
Well, do you want to wait to hear from Mr. Salisbury and Mr. Haskell?
No, I think you might as well hear from
Yeah.
Steve and
Okay,
let him do his business so that they can.
got it. So let's keep the momentum here, and Steve, why don't you make your presentation then?
Steve, you just show them the plan.
Where's the best thing so that they can see it?
I think it's gonna be here. Yeah.
Hopefully you've all, Steve Salisbury for the record. I'm gonna ask somebody whether they can see this.
Dave, Meredith, Christy, can you guys see what's the presentation board Steve has here? Christy's nodding her head yes. Do you see?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up, Dave, yes. You're on mute.
How
You're
can
on
you see
mute.
it, Christy?
I have it on like the speaker view.
Yeah, but the speaker view is looking at the wrong thing.
You have to spin that, the owl.
The owl is looking at Tracy now. Now it's looking at Bill.
Yeah, I thought it was facing the right way for a second.
No.
No. There you go. You got it.
Yep.
That's the right, oop, it was on the right thing.
It follows.
It
Yeah,
follows the
it
voice.
follows who's talking.
Oh, we let Steve talk, maybe you can.
Yeah, I think if Steve talks, it should hone in on him.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're on.
Aye. Again, Steve Salisbury for the record. Just real quick. Because right on the plan, there's all the standards for the subdivision. The radiuses and widths of rights of way and things like that. We meet all that. The red line is the full width of the right of way. The gray-blue shade is the traveled surface, which is 16 wide with 3-foot shoulders on each side. We bumped out the cul-de-sac, the traveled way of the cul-de-sac a little bit bigger based on the one of the attorney's feedback, which was correct. That's all good now. We added some culverts under the cul-de-sac to get the drainage in the site down to this exit point here with this level spreader. Because before I proposed, back in October, I proposed a rock bed under the road to let the water just come and go. We got rid of that, and now we're gonna control it with culverts. Made this profile view, just showing the grades coming up the road, percent grades, which are well within the standard. As you can see, the most of the road is almost completely flat to the cul-de-sac. These represent the culverts under the cul-de-sac and the profile view like that. And they're exaggerated, the scale is 5 feet. It's 5 times exaggerated vertically compared to the horizontal. That's traditional practice. Any questions?
I have a quick question. Can I ask a question?
Please.
I'm looking at the elevational profile and I can see that it's mostly flat. And if I'm reading it right, the distance or the height between the existing surface and the proposed surface, is that like 2 more feet higher? Am I interpreting that right?
You got that exactly right, yes.
Okay. But I see in the beginning that it's not quite as much. And then as it gets towards the middle, it doesn't look like it's any more than 2 feet.
That's right. Yeah, we tapered it to meet the at the beginning of the road, and then we start to build up the grade as we go in. And it's about 2 feet.
Okay,
Above
thank you.
existing surface now. That's what the standards call for.
So-
Mr. Chairman, could I just object for the record? Again, I'll sit right back down, but I want to be clear that my objection previously covers this as well, because your motion, the board's motion at the last meeting was to submit the plans 30 days in advance, and then 7 days in advance to have a brief rebuttal, but not to submit all new plans. So just for the record, I would object to admitting this because it's contrary to your motion from the last meeting.
James,
Right.
comment on the objection and the submittal.
I don't know. Super, I guess, fairness to Mr. Manahan, I think it's supercilious. I mean, normally I would agree with him, and I certainly agree with him on the thing that Ed tried to get in there a minute ago. But this here is where you've seen a technical deficiency. There's a correction. I say this in the realm of rebuttal. The question I would say is, does it significantly prejudice the other side by them not be able to come back and go, oh my God, now there's something new on this and we have to respond to it? That's a world of difference between that. Can you flip it over, Steve?
Yeah.
Between that and, for example, I think it was Mr. Manahan or maybe it was Dan, but in the cul-de-sac, there was a note, somebody noted it was off by a foot or something. So he fixed it.
Yeah.
I see that as fine. That's just that's what I would call like a rebuttal. So it depends on whether it's substantive, therefore the other side has to get a chance to respond to it, or a technical. Geez.
Okay.
We've got it for 7 days.
Yeah. one of the interesting terms used in the description of the road was a rock sandwich.
That been eliminated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you talk about what that was and why that went away?
Originally, I proposed that in lieu of culverts. It's a technique that just lets the stormwater literally travel underneath the road surface. Given it was so flat in the water, you walk it through there and observe the water just, I don't know where it goes, must just soak in the ground or something. There's no defined channels, there's no ditches. But in review of that,
Can you point out on this too, for the record, of where the culverts are, and then speak to why the culverts were added?
the culverts are added because we got rid of that quote rock sandwich.
Yeah.
So we know from observation of the site, there's some water that was traveling down generally in this direction, east to west.
Because you didn't want to interrupt the water flow to the level spreader and
Definitely
kind
not.
of,
So in lieu of having that, we picked the low points in the existing surface, the ground, and placed culverts. They're 12-inch culverts, they're small culverts. And there's 2 each, I believe, side by side. There just isn't that much flow. But there will, you get a rain event, you build up the road 2 feet, it's gonna pond up somewhere, so we'll just let it go its natural way. We're not changing the direction of the water.
I want to ask Mr. Manahan a question on that point.
Yeah.
This thing, the culverts, was this a change?
It was in response to Moynihan's
So I guess the
question.
the problem that I'm having, remember when I said substantive?
Mm-hmm.
If he and Mr. Pelagi and Mr. Cates feel that they haven't had adequate time to respond to the change of a culvert versus whatever it was, a rock sandwich. If that's what he's driving at, he can make his objection for the record on that point too.
Yeah, just responding to his complaints or his client's complaints.
So I would just say that, yes, Mr. Collier, we do believe that this is a substantive change that is prejudicial to us. We don't need to do it now, we can let Mr. Salisbury finish, but I did want to record our objection, but when we have the opportunity to respond, Mr. Bergeron would like to comment as to why this is extremely problematic and why they have not addressed the town's stormwater standards. And so it's important to make that point, but overall, we want to object to the whole process of continuing back and forth. We haven't had enough time, but the board needs to end this, frankly. It could go on forever and ever and ever. And you made it very clear in October that this should be it.
Assume you want to get in on that, Dan?
Share Mr. Manhan's objections. I don't have anything to add at this point. I still don't think it meets the standards. We'll discuss that. But we set up rules, we follow the rules, and I hope the board holds the applicant to the safe procedural rules.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just for the record, Roger Cates here from beautiful downtown Brunswick. On behalf of a number of the neighbors, I join in the objections that were just raised. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's a good example of substantive versus non-substantive.
Sure.
Where the cul-de-sac was a little bit wider, I don't think that's substantive, but maybe this is more substantive. I don't understand roads, but.
Yeah.
We didn't change the direction of the flow. You can talk about whether it's substantive or not. We didn't change the direction of the flow. We simply inserted some culverts so that the flow would be directed more meaningfully. It's not a substantive change. Anyway,
Okay.
it is what it is. It seems like we're spending an awful lot of time on a road that frankly our primary position is that does not need to be built in the first place.
Oh, we've spent a lot of time on many different things.
Yes, we have.
James, should we hear from Mr. Manahan now then?
I think we were going to Dan.
Yeah.
I think we went to Dan.
Yeah. Go to,
Then Mr.
yeah,
Cates and then Mr. Manahan. I think that's.
yeah. Yeah, Ed,
Chip, do you have anything to add before taking out?
Yeah, I would just state that, this road, again, everything, for the most part, that drains towards this road is not part of the quarry itself. The quarry itself is pumped to that level spreader location. So what we're doing by putting this culvert, 3 culverts in, or 3 culvert locations, the 2 that you see by the cul-de-sac are really for keeping the water from those operations going to that level spreader. The lower of those 3 culverts is for that existing area, sort of to the east of the road, that currently goes to that location. You'll actually see 2 wetlands on either side of the road right there. Those exist. That's where water naturally crosses the road right now. So what we're doing by picking that road up is just allowing it to continue in the same direction it's always gone. So preventing that from increasing flow.
Right, thank you. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it helps the board, I'm happy to defer and wait till after the board hears from Mr. Bergeron, who I think has a lot more technical.
Yeah,
expertise than I do.
I would agree with that. Yeah, so, Mr. Manahan?
Sure, just briefly, before I turn it over to Mr. Bergeron. These are substantive changes. Mr. Bergeron did have the last 7 days to look at them. He did prepare a letter to the board because it's prejudicial. We believe we should have the opportunity to submit that, but even if the board doesn't want to see that, Mr. Bergeron has some comments on the fact that this does not meet the standards of the ordinance. And so I guess I would ask you to hear from Mr. Bergeron, and then I would just have a couple other comments afterwards related to the Musetti easement and other issues.
Is it okay if I approach the board?
Please.
That's okay.
Good evening, my name is Mark Bergeron. I'm with TRC Environmental. As Augusta, we've been reviewing these plans and providing some technical input. As Mr. Manahan has said, I'll try to speak up so everybody can hear me. We still have some concerns with the design changes that have been made. It is true that these culverts have been added up at the cul-de-sac, but this rock sandwich, which is basically a layer of rocks wrapped with a filter fabric that, as Mr. Salisbury says, allows the water to pass. One of our concerns is down in this area here, actually on the Musetti property. There's kind of a natural low spot, so the groundwater the surface water tends to flow across this way. And even on their survey plans, they show in this area here, kind of a ponded area. And that usually indicates that something's holding the water up. It's probably the existing road. You make this road 2 feet higher, guess what? You're making a deeper pond. With the rock sandwich prior, that would have allowed some of that water to probably pass through. Now with that rock sandwich gone in this area, there's no culverts, there's nothing, so there's no way for this water that's passing through the woods here to cross the road unless it builds up and actually goes over the road. That's a problem. That doesn't meet the town standard. Further, on these culvert designs up in here, the applicant and their engineer has said, we've designed the pipes, it's going to be fine. There's some qualitative text in their comments to say, we've designed it, it's okay, the water's going to go. Your standards, the quarry licensing ordinance standards say, these are the things that need to be met. There's sections 2 and 3 of section Quarry licensing ordinance 6.2 C2 that talk about the storms that need to be met, the size of things that need to be demonstrated. I don't know if that's been done. It's not clear if that's been done, other than the applicant's consultant saying that, yeah, it works, it's okay. We don't think that's enough. So those are pretty substantial changes and issues that we see. Further, these culverts up in here that have been added, they talk about the stormwater from the quarry operations itself being pumped to the level spreader. They don't show that. They've never indicated how do they do that. Now with culverts here, are they going to kind of flop hoses into the quarry, drag them over the ground, insert them into the pipe? What about traffic driving over them? So there's a lot of those details that haven't been described in detail enough yet that meets the town standards. Thank you.
Yep.
So if you don't have any questions for Mr. Bergeron, I would just briefly like to add to that, which is to say that this is an example of how it's prejudicial, of how having these things come in at the last minute, this could go on forever, and it's just, frankly, it's not fair to others who are concerned about this, to our clients. And, you know, you allowed it yet more from the May meeting to be supplied in October. Then you said in October, you said, okay, we'll allow you one more chance, basically 30 days before the meeting. And then we could respond, and we did, and I predicted in my letter that they would try to, yet again, address our concerns, which they've tried to do and failed to do, as Mr. Bergeron said. So I can't object in the strong enough terms. I think this whole process needs to come to an end. This is, substantively, it's a change and it's unfair, and we would ask that the board reject this and reject the application. I would add one more point before I sit down, which is, and I commented this in my letter, which is the Musetti easement is insufficient. What we have here is a consent from Mr. Musetti to build the road in the prior iteration. We don't have his consent to build it in this iteration. Mr. Bear purported to wanted to submit something on that tonight, and you rightfully rejected it. But nonetheless, to establish that he has the right, that the applicant has the right to keep the road to town standards, as is required to be kept to town standards, he needs to provide an easement that gives him that right. The easement that he's provided does not give him that right. It very clearly says, and there's no dispute about this. In Mr. Bear's letter, he said, well, the law court in the Tomasini case said basically that if there's a dispute, the board shouldn't look at it. There's no dispute that the Musetti easement requires his consent for any construction or maintenance of the road. And that consent could be withheld. And you can't do anything about that. The town can't do anything about that. McQueen can't do anything about that. So we quite strongly believe that he does not have administrative standing to proceed, and we would ask that the board reject the application on that basis as well. Thank you.
Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As you know, I've been around this project for a long time now. I've outlasted several iterations of the board. And we keep running in place. I'm going to touch on stormwater and erosion control, sedimentation for a second. Way back when this was first presented, you can remember the application, right, board members, the stormwater studies are like this, they're thick. Because they made the effort to meet the town quarry license ordinance standards to show you, to give you modeling, to give you an analysis of what happens with the water and what's going to happen with the water through this project. That does not exist with this new iteration. With regard to stormwater, you might remember, those of you who were on the board way back when, we brought an expert to the planning board meeting, and she testified about some perceived deficiencies in the stormwater plan. And the stormwater plan, with her cooperation with the applicant's consultants, they got together and they worked it out and modified the stormwater plan based on the modeling, based on our experts' opinions. So now we have an effort to meet road standards that changes all of this dramatically. It raises a road 2 feet, and it puts in place materials that can erode. Mr. Bergeron talked really briefly about areas, low areas that aren't impacted by this culvert where water's going to pool, it's going to go over the road. There is no objective modeling about sedimentation, sediment flow to adjacent properties, sediment flow into sensitive areas. This area, you might remember, especially downstream in this property, there's a lot of wet areas that are very sensitive. Looks like this is the way the water and the sediment from the road is going to flow. We don't know, and if we don't know, you don't know, and that means the applicant hasn't met its burden of proof. That's just the way it is. This reminds me of the issue when we talked about noise, how we kind of dragged through changes and improvements, and okay, well, you're going to make us do something. There's no quantitative analysis. There's no measurement of what's going to happen with the flow with the new road in place. There's no analysis analysis whatsoever about what's gonna happen with erosion. How is erosion controlled, by the sediment exiting the road that's been built? Now, you dovetail all of that, which seems to me to be just a gaping hole in the burden of proof. You dovetail that with what Mr. Manahan just said, where these guys can't even come in and fix the road. Mr. Musetti says don't do it. That's not like title and interest, and it doesn't meet this standard. There's more, but, you know, hold them to the burden of proof, and if you do, the application needs to be denied. Thank you.
Ed?
No, I think we should go to Mr. Cates first.
No, sorry.
Thank you, and perhaps being the least technologically savvy one here, I don't know if I'm appearing to you sideways in that
You
picture.
are.
Yeah, that's
You
not
are.
because I'm not hanging from the wall, and I apologize. I
That's
can't
the
fix
first,
it.
Mr. Cates.
Yeah, well, at least I'm not in the famous cat suit, but
Yeah.
hopefully you can still hear me, and I will try to be brief. I don't really have anything to add to what Dan said or what Matt said on the stormwater issues, except to adopt what they said. I would just double down, though, on what Matt said about the easement. The easement, I think, is clearly insufficient, and Ed Bearer is a terrific attorney. And I'm going to take a wild guess that Ed has tried and tried and tried to get from Mr. Musetti a more suitable easement, in part because Ed said he was going to do that and has been unable to do that, and that should cause you real concern. The right title and easement not only means the right to use the road, but to state the obvious, the right to repair and maintain the road. They don't have that because Mr. Musetti has to give permission in order for them to do that. Yes, it's called reasonable permission, but that's in the eye of the beholder, and that could be in the eye of Mr. Musetti, particularly if at the time a crisis develops, Mr. Musetti is on vacation, like apparently he is today. So they just haven't shown that they've got the appropriate easement, and I just don't see how they get beyond that. The other point I would just make very briefly is on the subject of waiver. Hopefully you won't get into that too much. They haven't even requested a waiver, which is incumbent on them to do if they wanted one. And secondly, even if they did, I respectfully suggest they can't show their entitlement to a waiver because they can't show a hardship here. And a hardship means basically inability to use that land. Well, there are other things that land could be used for, in theory, besides a quarry. So for all those reasons, I will join in the comments of my colleagues and ask that we end this tonight, because once again, it's the applicant's burden to show that it's met these criteria. And now after these many months, they still haven't done it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to go to the members of the public? What have we been doing in the past?
I say we give, turn the floor over to Ed here, and then we'll hear from the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the issue of right title and interest, it's a red herring. Frankly, we provided to you a fairly detailed letter dated January 5th. And on page 2 of that letter, we reference a case, Southbridge Corporation versus the Board of Environmental Protection. The applicant in that instance had only a claim by adverse possession to the property that he wanted to develop, and that was found to be sufficient. It hadn't been confirmed by a court. It was simply a claim of adverse possession. In this instance, Mr. Musetti hasn't withheld his consent. He's given consent for the construction of the road, and that's all that's before us right now, is construction of the road. It's not for this board, as we say in our letter, for you to hypothesize as to what may or may not happen in the future, just like it was not for the Board of Environmental Protection to hypothesize about whether somebody could actually prove their right by adverse possession to the property that was being developed. So that's all. No matter how many times people repeat things, it doesn't make them correct. So when 3 lawyers stand up and say the same thing, echoing one another in an echo chamber of their own making, that doesn't make it correct. in this instance, we've done everything you've asked us to do. You know as well as I do that no applicant's ever had to design a roadway that we've designed this at this stage of the game. That doesn't happen. We have given you a more detailed drawing of this road than you would find in most, if not all, applications. And the revisions that we made in response to criticisms, we could have simply sat back and said, no, that's perfectly adequate the way we had initially designed it. But we took the criticisms to heart and said, well, we can make it a little better, we'll make it a little better. And now we're being chastised for that? That doesn't make sense. And I don't accept the notion that that's a substantive change to what we submitted in December. Water flows through a rock sandwich just like it flows through a culvert. Water flowing, it's flowing in the same direction, we change anything like that. Now, as for the technical issues that Mr. Bergeron brought up in his presentation today, we actually responded, I think, to those with Mr. Haskell's letter, which is part of our January 5th submission concerning the standing water and things of that nature. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Haskell now. Tell you that he didn't just dream up this, these revisions and put his opinion in writing to you without giving some thought to the analysis that went into it. We were part of this process that Mr. Flake described when the original stormwater plan was designed. I can't help it if Mr. Bergeron and Mr. Manahan are late to the party and weren't around for all of that. There was extensive discussion about that, and we were part of that. And I think that Mr. Haskell is going to tell you that nothing that we're doing now alters anything that was proposed and approved of by this board before concerning stormwater runoff or erosion. Sure.
Good. Sort of dovetail there. I think it's important to remember that if you look at the, sorry, am I being picked up?
Yeah, loud.
Okay, I'll project a little bit better.
Yeah.
The hydrology studies that we did do back in the early stages of this process, per the ordinance, focus on the area of improvements. For this project, it's the quarry. That's what we're improving. So you'll note in those studies, this plan, I apologize, is a bit small. So, but I know you've all seen this at this point. Really does focus on just that, the area of the quarry. What's happening with this road, by raising this up, we're not altering drainage patterns. We're not increasing impervious surface. It really is just a vertical change in that road. Now that can alter drainage patterns. I certainly admit that. In this case, what we have is very distinct low points on that road. So by adding a culvert at those low points, what we're able to do is keep that water moving. If I were to, there's nothing in my model that I would edit to reflect a change in the road here. That's why we didn't prepare a revised model in that instance, because nothing is changing in the proposed quarry. So what's happening is the stormwater that's coming down onto this road is existing stormwater. It's going to be existing stormwater after the project is done. It's not changing. We're not changing anything draining towards that road. So the question becomes, is there anything that I would provide from a drainage calculation standpoint that would alter anything with what we've already provided? And the answer is no. What we're doing is showing that we can adequately move the water through the site by raising this road. It's separate from our stormwater analysis that we did before relative to the quarry. It's a discussion of whether we're adequately moving that water through. So that's the reasoning for what we've decided to do. We've picked those low spots because of that. What water's doing right now is it's collecting in this low spot. That's why you see these two wetlands here that's bisected by the existing roadway. So what happens is water is collecting in these low spots. It's being burned up to some extent by this road right now. It collects in this low spot and it overtops. And it goes to the next wetland and down. Similarly, at the bottom of the road, it's flowing over the road, so we're adding a culvert there. So what we do is add a culvert in that location, right? So we're not going to be exacerbating any sort of problem that does not exist now. As it relates to the sort of low area, I believe somewhere in that location, again, nothing more gets sent to that. Currently, that water goes up to this wetland here. What that low hole appears to be is some sort of an old quarry hole from years and years ago. There's no evidence of that overtopping that road. Or, as I said, it doesn't appear to collect anything other than what drains onto it. So it seems to seep through and eventually overtop into this ditch and to the wetland that's there. So again, raising the road doesn't change anything in that sense. So I guess in short, there's nothing I would change in my model to change that would be actually reflecting of raising this road. The model is inclusive of this. There's nothing I would do that would raise, to reflect raising the road. So is there anything else on that? I mean, as far as the rock sandwich, we took that out solely because of the comments relative to whether it met the road standard for sub-base material. Road standard is explicit that it wants type D material, it says it right there. So to remove any and all doubt, we removed that, made that meet to a T the ordinance. I'm personally all for changing whatever sections of that to a rock sandwich, if that is what folks want. It was really just an effort to match, 100% to the ordinance. That is another, it's basically, as Mr. Bergeron pointed out, it really is just a buildup of rock wrapped in some, sort of porous fabric that allows that water to pass through where it needs to. It's just a different kind of culvert, I guess you could think of. So I think that's about everything. As far as pumping rates go, it's not really a stormwater related question. It's more of an operational piece. They are gonna have to figure out, sort of where that hose runs and things like that, but it's not, again, anything that is analyzed in the model. So that, it's done as needed, for operations. So they'll have to, work with that on an operational scale.
All right.
Anything I missed?
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm gonna open it up to the public. James, are you ready? Yeah. All right, I'll open it up to the public for any questions for the applicant. Not a single question, comment, question, going once. Mr. Kish.
Yeah, I'm doing that. There we go. Well, I have a comment, but not a question. Can I do a comment?
Sure.
Well, good. Well, I want to present a brief analogy. This whole situation is like one very long take-home test. And I'm sure sometime in high school or college, probably all of us got to take a take-home test at one point or another. You get the assignment, you take it home, you got open book, you do the work, you turn it in. And every now and again, I know when I took these, a teacher or professor would give you an opportunity to get it right if you didn't quite get it right. It didn't happen all the time. So you get a second chance to get it right. But never a third or a fourth or a fifth, never 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. So at some point in the process, your time was up, your work was done, and you got the grade you got. And I with all due respect to this whole process and everybody involved, I think we've long passed that point in this quarry situation, that the take-home test, the work has been done, the time is over, and perhaps there's no more time to get it right. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the public? All right, I'll close public comment.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bergeron would like to offer a response to Mr. Hedrick after the public.
Sure. I think we're there.
Yeah.
Thank you. One thing I wanted to point out, Mr. Haskell is right that these culverts, the intent of the culverts is to pass the flows, but in the original model, the original stormwater design that they did, this cul-de-sac was not there. This is a new addition. I agree it's not new impervious area, but it's a new thing on the ground that could affect stormwater. So again, we believe that they should be updating their stormwater model. Maybe the results are the same, but again, that information isn't to the board, isn't to the public to say that, yes, we checked our model, we added the road, we added the culverts, and there's no change.
You mean for the whole,
For the whole quarry, right, because, you know, again, the quarry design, the stormwater model looked at that, but since that model has been done, this cul-de-sac has been added, the road height has increased, therefore that model should change. Again, because of this road being in here now, being 2 feet higher with no culverts, no rock sandwich, there's no way for the surface water to pass through unless it goes over the road. That's ponding on somebody else's property. That's a problem. That does not meet the town standard. Again, it's fixable, but this plan does not fix it. So we continue to believe that the changes that they've been making and the information the board has is not sufficient to prove their burden that they've met all the applicable road and stormwater standards. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, obviously, this vote's going to go on for a long time if you're going to allow that. So I think what Mr. Bergeron doesn't recognize is that the cul-de-sac is already there. There's a road surface already there. We're not altering the flow of the water by building a new road in an area where there wasn't. I'm going to let Mr. Haskell address any further comments that Mr. Bergeron made to the word.
Yeah, I think one thing I'll add to that, Ed, is that he's right, that the flow path before flowed directly from the quarry across this existing cul-de-sac that's not built up to this level spreader. What we're changing now is building that up a little bit to put in 2 large culverts that would flow through that. That's not going to speed up flow. If anything, that slows down a little bit of flow, holds it back on the site. I doubt it's going to, from what I've modeled, you know, just on the with a pen and paper, just to size these culverts, based on the area that's going to them, it's going to flow right through. It's not a change really to the model that would affect, certainly would not increase any peaks. There's nothing there that would increase a peak off the property. That's just not realistic. Relative to raising the road, again, not changing any drainage patterns by raising the road. That road currently drains to a low flow via ditches on the uphill side of that road. By raising that road, you're not exacerbating that problem. Simply putting a culvert in that location allows it to flow as it always has. Again, that said, we're more than happy to go to a rock sandwich if that is the direction that anybody feels is the right way. I would just point out that I don't feel like it's going to change the drainage pattern. I think it would still probably end up going to the low spot.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you know, we keep going back and forth, and now he's saying, well, we took out the rock.
Mr. Manahan, can we just, I get it, all right, I get it. So, James, what I feel like, you know, there's obviously 3 issues on the table here relative to the road. We've got, you know, the road standard compliance issues. We've got the storm water compliance issues, but we've got this, and I don't know if issue is the right term to be using, but the whole title right and interest question, and if that is truly an issue, I would think it would make all of this discussion about the technical aspects of the road a moot point. And I think that's something we should be discussing more.
Well, I think we should, but I was wondering,
Yeah.
before we do that, do you wanna, I was just had this idea that we should ask Dave, Meredith,
Yes.
and Ms. Anastasia,
Absolutely.
whether they wanna ask some technical questions of our experts before you close the public hearing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I
Christie,
have, well, I think it got answered, but the question I had is, I was looking through the checklist, and there's a section in the checklist on, specifically on storm water management. And one of the areas it covers is roads and driveways. So the question was like, if, as we are revisiting this issue about the road, do we have to revisit that section 2.4C, which is related to stormwater management as it relates to the road? Or is that separate? Like, is it overlapping or is it separate? That was the only thing that came up for me. Does that make sense? Does my question make sense?
I think the engineer's point was clear.
That it was operational.
Mhm,
Yeah, I think he said that it affected everything.
mhm.
That was their perspective.
Mhm.
From whose perspective?
Mr. Bergeron.
Mr. Bergeron, he said it would affect everything.
Was
I'm not
our-
saying that's the
was
case.
Our perspective, though.
I never said it was, but what I said, that was his perspective. So I'm sure your perspective is that it didn't.
Well, and we have said that.
Yeah,
I'm not
Chip
sure
said
why you didn't say that.
I was going to, but you
No,
jumped
no.
down my neck. Jesus, guy's gotta have a little time, Ed.
But our view is it
Little
does
pace
affect 6.2C,
Mhm.
clearly.
Yeah, so the answer before, unless I'm gonna be interrupted again, there's arguments on both sides.
Mhm. Meredith, any questions, comments?
I guess, no, I'm with you, Bill, is I think that the issue of the right-of-way waiver is a far bigger issue. I'm hung up on that and not hung up on this stuff.
Dave, I know it was a key issue for you at the October 20th hearing. And where are you on that now?
I'm still where I was. I did notice one thing in the consent that they presented. It actually has the wrong deed reference in it, which probably can be corrected, but it's saying that the Musetti easement is recorded in book 7156, page 329, and it's actually recorded in 7146, page 329. But that's a technical issue. I still feel the same way I did. I think everybody knows that I have a lot of experience in easements and right-of-ways, and I mean, I've done it for 35 years. I feel that that's just not sufficient.
Mhm.
You wanna close the public hearing?
I believe I did close the public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I'll close the public hearing again, sure. So we're gonna close the public hearing. All right, and continue with discussion then. So, we could talk about the technical aspects of the road till we're blue in the face. We could talk about the stormwater management, erosion control requirements till we're blue in the face, but I want to talk about this larger issue of the title right and interest. And James, if you have any input on that, and Ed, I know you touched upon that in your letter too. And we'll get there on that, but is someone else potentially controlling the access to this property? Is that really the issue here that,
Well, I'd like to say this about that. I read the Tomasino case and the other case cited therein, and the one that Ed mentioned, Southbridge or whatever it was. And Southbridge Corp versus the Board of Losick and Binda. I don't have my glasses. Oh, no, Southbridge Corp versus the Board of Environmental Protection. And the law was for 50 years, there was a series of case law which said, just as I forget who, one of these guys had referred to it, that might have been Ed, that if you had a dispute with your neighbor, like where a property line was, or whether you owned it or you had prescriptive rights over it or whatever, the board wasn't supposed to look at that. The board's job was to say, look, do you have a colorable interest? Does it look like you could own it or you could have the right to do something on it? Then the court would say, all right, well, boards shouldn't decide those matters. Boards should go ahead and do the permit on whether the standards are met. And then, if they were wrong later on, and it turned out that the line was over here versus over there, or an example that Ed brought up, that the adverse possession claim didn't come through, then the permit is void ab initio because they submitted false evidence. So that was always the way those things were handled. Along with that, there's also a body of case law that went along, in the MMA manual has a great synopsis of this. It said that the document or the deed must give the applicant a legally cognizable expectation of having the power to use the property in the ways that would be authorized by the permit if approved. That refers to Murray versus the town of Lincolnville. So legally cognizable expectation of having the power to use the property in the ways that will be authorized by the permit if approved. So it's kind of funny, when you look at it that way, it's not a dispute over who owns the road, right? We know that Mr. Mazzetti, it's his property, and Mr. Moore or Morse? So we know who owns the property, there's no dispute about that. The question is the easement. And what rights do they have in the easement? So, for example, in Maine, you can only do what it says you can do, and it doesn't say you can do it, you can't do it. So the argument would be, if you needed to get the permit, you needed to be able to pave it, and it said that you could only have gravel, that would be a problem, right? Because you wouldn't have a legally cognizable expectation of being able to pave it. Mm-hmm. Here, the question is murky. The Tomasino case does not help. It's a bad case that most lawyers don't like, but it is the law court, so they're right. There's a long dissent in it too. It was about a guy who had an easement, and he wanted to cut a tree. He wanted to cut 3 trees, but one of the trees he wanted to cut within the easement. And in the town that he was in, bizarrely enough, you had to get a permit to cut a tree. And they weren't really sure whether the easement gave him the right to cut a tree. I just thought that was strange myself, because if you've got an easement for a right of way, you have the right to make way. Naturally, you have the right to cut trees because it goes along with making way. You can't make way if the tree's in the way. But anyhow, the court seemed to say, well, you gotta go off and figure that first, and then go back to come back to the planning board. That's outrageous. And it would be outrageous if you had to do that every time you did anything. So the theory was, and I don't think this is washed out yet, that, if there was a title dispute, you had to go off and get declaratory judgment and then go back to the board. God help us if you have to do that. So with this murkiness in the law, what I would say is, they're not gonna like this, so I don't listen too much, because neither one's gonna like it. If you decide one way, the other guy's gonna go to court. So if you decide for Mr. Bear, Mr. Manhan's gonna go in, Mr. Blake and Mr. Cates are gonna go to court and argue the other way, and so on. I think you should say, is this practically for what we need done? What should be done? So in regard to the road, I think it's outrageous to submit an easement that doesn't allow for ongoing maintenance without somebody else's approval. Technically, Ed's right. There's no dispute until there's a dispute. But boy, that's a hell of a way to operate. Now, the example is right in front of you. It's right there. They made one little change, and then the approval is null and void because it needed to be changed. And Mr. Mazzetti's in Tahiti or Florida. Let me finish. That's the truth.
The changes aren't on his property. They don't affect his easement.
Right. But let me finish. But the moment they do, you have the same problem. So what I would say is, if you think that's a problem, then they don't have the right to do what they should do.
Just look at an 8-year investment in all of this, and it could potentially come down to one person who's never even been here derailing it. And
Yeah,
Can I ask a question?
absolutely, go for it.
I thought that the requirement was to have the road to this standard and maintain it to this standard. Yes?
Yes.
What is written in the code? The easement,
Yeah, so-
there's no debating it. The easement says he doesn't have the right to just maintain it. So I don't see where there's any ambiguity or dispute here. We have an easement that specifically says you can use it, but you can't do whatever you want, which could be maintain it. And we specifically say in the code, he has to maintain it. So it does not allow him to do what is required by code. Am I missing something?
No. I'd like to hear from Dave again. And Dave, again, for the record, could you, and just with your vast experience in this department, could you kind of summarize your, what's that? Vast experience in this department. Can you kind of summarize your issue with the easement again, just for the record, please?
Yeah, basically, easement law says, in layman's terms, if the document doesn't say it, you don't get the right. And you can't read into these documents that there's anything other than that. So it's very clear that they do not have a right to maintain the road without getting permission from somebody else, which I don't believe gives them the proper right that they need to be able to maintain that road. I mean, we're talking forever too. I mean, we're talking,
And
this is.
it's part of the code. It's part of what we ask. It's not an ambiguous aspect. It's a part of the code.
Yeah, and the other thing is we specifically asked the applicant to get that right, and the applicant left the meeting on October 20th saying that they would get that right. And now they've come back and they haven't got the right. So the applicant must have recognized the need for that right.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I understand from Mr. Musetti's lawyer that he actually spoke with you about what was necessary before offering to sign anything. Is that correct?
When did I do that? When did I talk to?
I'm asking a question.
Did I talk to Mr. Musetti's attorney? I did not talk.
Mr. Musetti.
I did not talk to Mr. Musetti, no.
Okay.
I fielded a call from his office. That was the only thing. And it was, I think Kim called me about it.
Okay.
Yep.
Kim who?
No,
Parody?
Kim Parody.
Oh, I said, what?
Yeah.
Do you recall what she asked and what you said?
They were confused about where the board was on this, what the easement issue was. And, this was a call in the middle of the day at work. And what I conveyed to her was was essentially, I think you need to clarify the easement language in this, that, with the road traveling over their property, that, it can meet the standards, it can be maintained, Mr. Musetti wouldn't be impeding any of that process. I'm.
while we have a break, can somebody point out to me in section 5.14 of the subdivision ordinance where there's a ongoing requirement for maintenance?
The other thing I'd like to find too in the quarry license ordinance is just the whole reference to title right and interest.
There's right title and interest.
Right title and, well, everybody's using the TRI abbreviation.
I don't know why.
So,
Right title and interest was,
yeah.
maybe that's the new way.
Mhm.
It was right title and interest when I went to law school. It was right title and interest for 22 years practicing law, and suddenly it's changed. But I've become a dinosaur.
You know, and Ed too, I mean, relative to your question about the call to me about the easement question, you know, I didn't just step off the boat either. You know, I've been in this process, I've been involved, I've been one of the only board members other than, I believe Meredith, from who's been here from day one. And I know very well when to talk and when not to talk. And so, and, you know, and so I was very, very careful in what I conveyed to Kim about that.
I understand, and it wasn't like the applicant or an opponent was calling in there for any questions.
Of course, and you know, and I've been, you know, I've been asked a lot of questions and I've been confronted with a lot of comments through all of this, and all of them, I'd like to think I've been on an even keel and had my ears open and my head in the game.
So can somebody point out to me where the ongoing maintenance is a requirement, either under the quarry licensing ordinance or the design and construction standards of the subdivision ordinance?
It's in 6.2A2, Ed. The owner and operator of the quarrying activity shall be responsible both jointly and severally for ensuring the maintenance of all infrastructures, structures, and sites. So it's maintenance is required in 6.2A2 under general requirements.
That's what we're referring to.
That's in the site, right? Not off the
Yeah.
site?
It's
Does it say in the site?
Infrastructures, structures, and their sites.
infrastructures so the owner and operator of a quarrying activity shall be responsible for ensuring the maintenance of all infrastructures. That's all related, infrastructures, structures, and their sites.
And their site.
So infrastructures and their sites.
Okay.
So, right. So anything, frankly, any infrastructure related to the project.
Well, do you want to hang your hat on that and get a motion? Mr. Merritt seemed to be pretty determined there.
So yes, so, you know, we're always working towards motions. We're always working towards, you know, finding a position on every application. And, you know, I gotta tell you, for the first time in 8 years, I feel like we're spinning our wheels here. And we're creating potentially this perpetual motion machine.
I felt like that for a long time, but.
Yeah, you know, the other thing I'll say, and I think Mr. Kish had the comment too, is, you know, this, you know, as representatives of the town and the people of the town, you know, we've tried to keep this as much of a human process as possible. You know, it's not a black and white process. It's not a take-home test. It's by far an incredibly challenging, technical, frustrating process we've all invested quite a bit into over the years. And I think that's one of the things I'm very proud of our board and our process here in town, is that it is a human process, and we've tried to be fair and have our ears open to all. That being said, I still have to facilitate a process towards an endpoint, and that's been a challenge every single hearing. So here we are. I think we've got an issue with title right and interest, and I'm gonna keep using that in that order. And, I'm sensing that Dave, Meredith, and I are on a similar wavelength. I'd like to hear too from Christy and Tracy as well on this. So Tracy, you're right here. Why don't you go first?
Well, I have to say that I concur, and I am still hung up on the easement language and the right title and interest issue, so.
And I think Dave summed it up, and Dave, you're great at that. Thank you for doing that again. That, we still have an issue here. We asked the applicant for something to clean this up, to come back, clear it up, and it just wasn't. Christy, what do you think?
I have a question and then I have an opinion. If someone has a road and it meets the road standards, and then something happens to it, like a rainstorm washes it out or something like that, and it isn't returned to the standard for whatever reason, they don't have money to return it to the standard, they don't have permission from the person who gave them permission through an easement, is there a process whereby then they're not allowed to use that road because it's not up to standard?
Yeah, definitely. Tim?
Have you ran into that?
Not
Yeah.
that I can recall.
Okay, the reason I asked that question is because, I mean, if you had an easement that was iffy on whether you could repair the road or not, if they did build it and it was up to standard and they weren't allowed to repair it if it fell below standard, then they would no longer have access to the site, presuming that there was some sort of trigger that like closed the road if it was no longer up to standards. Anyway, that's the question that's kind of been circulating in my head a little bit, but I totally agree with this piece about the easement. It doesn't say what it needs to say. And we pointed out that it didn't say what it needed to say, and it still doesn't say what it needs to say.
And I also point out, Christy, that I can see what you're thinking about the easement, and if you have an easement to access this road, doesn't specify that they can maintain the road, but if they had the easement, the road has to be usable to maintain the use of the easement. But the other reason why we have the road standards is to protect the properties around it. So let's say the road's passable, but like a culvert closes up or becomes clogged or something, so that the lack of maintaining the road is starting to damage other people's properties or impact other people's properties. It's not necessarily just a right that they need to be able to protect their own interests, but they have to maintain the standard to protect the town's interests, the land around it that's beyond the road. And that's why we have the standard, is to protect town interests.
Yeah, I agree with you. I still think there's that question though, of even in that scenario, if the road is no longer up to standard for whatever reason, for whatever amalgamation of owners linked to that road, what happens if it isn't brought back up to standard? Does it get closed? Is it like a road association thing? Like what happens, or does it just deteriorate? And that starts to go into the weeds, but that's the question I have, is what happens when a road drops below standard?
I guess I could see a scenario where, it's fallen below standard and there's some issue being created by that. Mr. Musetti says, I don't care. And some third party could be having this negative impact. And we as a town tried to get the road to that standard, but he says, I don't want to let you maintain the road. And suddenly you have some third party having the impact of a damaged road that the quarry is required to maintain according to the But as long as Mr. Musetti says, I don't care, I don't want to let you do it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I mean, I guess my bold underscore opinion on this is I thought the planning board was clear on what we saw as a deficiency in the easement. And I thought we were told it would be rectified, and I don't see it rectified.
Chairman, I want to offer one last observation. I think that Maine law, and maybe your counsel will not agree with me, but if I have a right to travel over a right of way, I have a right to maintain that right of way. And I think even though our easement says that we may need his consent, I think that we also by law have a right to maintain that right of way. When we were here in October, we didn't have a written consent to the construction of the right of way, which was since obtained. I think that it's how many angels dance on the head of a pin if you're going to hang your hat on the notion that we don't have a right to maintain that road. I think by common law we have a right to maintain that road. So, in any event, do as you will. We're happy to take whatever decision you make.
James, any comment?
Well, in general, Ed is correct that you do have the right to maintain it in a certain way, right? If it says ingress and egress by vehicle and by foot, and it was for a single-family residence or camp by a lake, and traditionally had been used, and the circumstances surrounding the grant were such that it was a gravel path, and that's what everybody had, then you'd have the right to go and continue the gravel path. You can't build a superhighway, and you can't pave unless it says in the ordinance that you can. So that part he's right about. On the other hand, here it's specifically rebutted by what's in the easement itself. And so when you look at easement construction, you look at the 4 square corners of the deed. So I'm struck by, again, from the MMA manual, Understanding to Apply, page 13, it says, for example, where a person has an easement for ingress and egress to a lake, did not have the right to build and use a dock by virtue of the language of that easement, that person landed standing to apply for a permit. It's fascinating. You can go in and out on the easement, but you can't build the dock, so you can't apply for a dock because the easement doesn't let you do it. Here, the easement specifically talks about needing Mazzetti's permission. So the 4 square corners of the deed go against the common law right to. So I just think it's outrageous to expect the owner of a quarry with trucks coming and going and all that's going on to have to go to Mr. Mazzetti every time for his permission.
And that road's gonna take a beating.
The road in its present condition has been used for 30 years.
Any further comment from the board? Tracy's shaking her head no. Meredith's pretty quiet. That's a no. Dave, that's a no. Tracy, that's a no. Anybody have a motion floating around?
Sure, what is the number of the section we're working on here?
Well, there's a couple different sections. Technically, I think it's 6.2C, we've got a couple of relative issues. Thank you. It's 6.2G. 6.2G, road and driveway design, circulation and traffic. We've got discussion points in 6.2C, stormwater management.
And then you have the land use ordinance.
And then we have the, which, by the way, we all voted on at the October 20th hearing, is that the land use ordinance does apply, and we had a pretty specific motion about that.
So when you discovered that the road was serving more than 2 lots, then it was brought to the board's attention that meant that it had to be brought up to
Yeah,
the standards for a road, which is something from the land use ordinance. Kim could give you the section.
Mr. Chairman, I think the
Yeah.
two sections are TRI section that says the requirement for title right or interest, which is in 6.1C, that requires title right or interest. And then the requirement to maintain the road, which, as I mentioned earlier, is 6.2A2. And if you don't have TRI to maintain the road under 6.2A2, then you don't meet that performance.
yeah, so, and I know everybody loves when I read from past minutes, but I just want to read our motion from October 20th, where we were, Meredith moved and Christie seconded to amend the previous motion to include the findings of fact that section B11 of the land use ordinance applies based on the understanding of Quarrying License Ordinance section 2.8. And what that says, section 2.8, is that conflicts with other ordinances, which states that it is anticipated that the application will be reviewed concurrently with this ordinance and the requirements of the land use zoning ordinance, where this ordinance imposes a greater restriction upon the use of the land, buildings, or structures than other rule, regulation, bylaw, permit, or provision of law. The provisions of this ordinance shall prevail. That was the motion, and it was approved unanimously. So just to put a little context in the equation there.
Well, I guess, so as for a motion at this moment, can I just say, if we don't feel that the standard is met of 6.2? Well, 6.2A.2, C and G. Well, I guess that's a little ambiguous. It's the how to categorize the waiver doesn't satisfactorily allow them to maintain the road, which is a requirement of 6.2A.2. It states that they need to be able to maintain the infrastructure.
It's a start.
It's it's
Yeah.
mangled. I don't know that I have the knowledge of and the understanding of the flowing of the water on all of this to know whose argument makes more sense in terms of whether there's a concern with the road creating a dam or not. So I guess I'm at this point, I'm not arguing about the stormwater drainage, just simply that.
Meredith, maybe what you're trying to convey there is more of a contextual comment relative to section 6.2G, the road and driveway and design standards of the quarry ordinance. We're essentially in that process of review and the discovery of the road issue, that it was brought to light that there was a superseding, much larger issue with title right and interest, which takes us back to Mr. Manahan, what was the section again?
6.2A2 is the requirement to maintain infrastructure. 6.1C is the requirement to submit title right or
Yeah.
interest.
Of those two sections, not being able to be addressed.
Well, if you say what the standard is, and then state that clearly, section, the applicant has to meet this section and this section, and then all you have to say is Meredith could move that that standard has not been met because. You catch that, Meredith?
I worry a little, after we had the last meeting, it is the argument that it's not a new road. If we should go to court, that I don't know that I want to include. I guess I have found this whole second round of the quarry was kind of impossible to review, be asked to review this project as an existing business going on when everything about it is new. Yes, there is a road going into the quarry, but it hasn't been used this way. There were times where they only sold one rock. I mean, they were just selling rocks. The impact of the activity that they're proposing is completely different. So I think as our responsibility to protect the town, we have to make sure that everything is satisfactory. The ordinance is written a bit in the existing as though all this stuff was already happening, and we're reviewing what they've been doing. They haven't been doing any of this. This is all new. And there isn't any way for us to review it. But all that is to say that I don't think that we have any hang up in the existing review, that it does say that you have to be able to maintain the infrastructure. And if they don't have an easement to maintain the infrastructure, then they aren't meeting the standard. And I don't think that can be argued.
Sounds like a motion to me.
As I'm just explaining why I don't really want to go into, I can understand what the argument is. I think we have grounds to make the decisions that we've made, but I think that the grounds that we make our decisions are based on the fact that this is all new stuff, this new equipment, new impact on the well water, new sound implications, new everything. And we've been asked to review it as existing, and it's just constantly impossible. We have to protect our duty is to protect the interests of the town. So trying to stick to, I would like this motion to stick to they don't have an easement to do something as the requirement in the existing. It's stated there that I'm sticking to 6.2.A.2. They don't have the easement to do that, so they haven't fulfilled the standard.
I can see Heidi is still writing. No.
To say your license is rejected.
Do you want to? Yeah.
A lot has been said, and I'm not sure what you want as your motion.
Yeah.
But Meredith's final statement was, final statement, the last two I will go with, the applicant has to be able to maintain the infrastructure. And if they do not have the ability to maintain the infrastructure, we've got that. Yeah, it can't be approved. And then regarding section 6.2.A.2, I'm not sure where the points go. I'll find that in the application. or in the ordinance. They don't have the appropriate easement. They have not fulfilled the standard. Those are her words, and we need to
Yeah,
make
it's
it-
gotta get way more
Yeah.
specific.
Yes.
If you don't have yourself muted, to please mute yourself on Zoom.
Jeff?
Jeff? Can you press mute, Jeff, please?
I haven't made a sound.
I know. No, A+, thank you.
I thought I was on mute.
Mhm.
You want me to give it a shot?
Give it a shot, James.
Until Heidi's ready.
I'm ready when you are, just go slow.
The land use ordinance
Yep,
has been found by the board.
okay, hold on. 6011.2.
You ready?
Yep,
To apply to this application,
okay, hold on. Okay,
specifically,
yep,
6B11.2,
yep,
6B11.2 requires
yep,
that all roads, I don't have to cover, all roads, all roads,
private.
private roads, that serve 2 or more lots
Yep,
must meet
yep,
street design and construction standards.
okay,
Of section
yep,
5.14
yep,
of the subdivision ordinance. That's a hard period at the end of that one, whereas the British would say full stop.
yes,
And then, I think you would say that the QLO section 6.2 sub capital A, sub 2,
yep,
requires that the owner and operator ensure
hold on. Yep,
the maintenance of all
okay,
infrastructures, structures, and their sites with an S.
hold on. Okay,
Is this rewriting my motion?
Yeah. I made a little meat, I
Yeah,
made a little meat to it.
I specifically said I didn't want the first subdivision. .2A.2. leave the subdivision out. Just, I think that they can get into arguments again about, we made the motion, we all agreed on that. I just think for proceedings, there's a standalone item that we should isolate. If you want to get into the subdivision thing, it should be a separate motion.
Well, it's not the subdivision, it's the land use ordinance, which.
Or land
Yeah.
use, yes, okay, but I
You
still,
don't want to bring in the land use ordinance standards at all?
I
think that the issue at hand stands alone on 6.2.
Should I finish the motion I was trying to make and then, or do you want to blow it up?
Meredith, could we just let him finish and then let's see if we put it on the hook or not?
Okay.
So you got the one and then you got the other, right? So what you would say is,
Do you want what I have so far? Would that help?
no. The next thing would be the easement.
I want to have a specific reference to title, right, and interest.
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
I'm getting there.
Mhm.
The easement provided by the applicant.
Hold on,
What's the next sentence?
You're right.
okay,
Specifies that
Yep.
changes in, what does it say, maintenance, something like that? Construction or maintenance, whatever it says, you're gonna have to look at that. Has to be approved by the Mr. Musetti, the subservient tenement. What do you want to say?
you want the subservient tenant?
Subservient tenement is the technical term. And then you can put in parents, Mr. Musetti. Now, here's the key line, Bill.
Mhm.
As this is the Meredith's point. As it is impractical to obtain Mr. Mazzetti's approval to repair and maintain.
Hold on. Yep,
The road. The applicant is not shown sufficient.
I'm sorry, maintain and repair the road, what was the next word?
There's a comma after that.
Yeah,
Maintain and repair the road, comma. The applicant has not shown sufficient,
hold on,
where's the, you know the section for that? Mr. Manhan hauled them overhead and
6.1C, where it's sufficient here.
okay, the applicant has not shown sufficient, where I am.
T is in Thomas.
No, 6.1C is in
Cat.
Cat.
cat. So the last,
It's not, yeah, I got not shown sufficient evidence of title, right, or interest.
Okay,
Period. That's a long, windy motion. And Meredith doesn't like it. I didn't even finish it before she didn't like it.
Sorry, I
Let's
get what
see.
you were, I misunderstood which section you were referencing to. That's a good motion, fine.
Meredith likes it. I look at it.
Well, let's have Heidi read it back.
all right. The land use zoning ordinance has been found by the board to apply to this application, specifically, 6.B11(2) requires that private roads that serve 2 or more lots must meet street design and construction standards of section 5.14 of the subdivision ordinance. The Quarrying licensing ordinance section 6.2A2 requires that the owner and operator ensure the maintenance of all infrastructures, structures, and their sites. The easement provided by the applicant specifies the changes in maintenance must be approved by the subservient tenant, Mr. Musetti.
Tenement.
Tenement, sorry, that's what was throwing me off. Mr. Musetti, as it is impractical, yes? You didn't want
Impractical
impractical.
or impracticable? Impractical.
As it is impractical to obtain Mr. Musetti's approval to repair and maintain the road, the applicant has not shown sufficient evidence of title, right, or interest.
I think maintain the road from time to time, ongoing.
I think we should also reference the October 20th unanimously approved motion where we found that the land use ordinance.
Oh, that'd be right at the start, right?
Yeah.
Right at the start. Can you read that, Heidi, right at the start? Please.
The land use zoning ordinance has been found by the board to apply to this application.
Then in parents, C,
See board motion of October 20th, 2021.
regarding the same.
October 20,
Yeah, the last hearing, the 20th, October.
okay. Reread. The land use zoning ordinance has been found by the board to comply to this application. See board motion of October 20th, 2021 regarding same.
Did you say comply or apply?
To apply to this application.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So I'll start over. The land use
Yeah,
ordinance, the land use zoning ordinance has been found by the board to apply to this application. See board motion of October 20, 2021 regarding same. Specifically, 6B11(2) requires that all private roads that serve 2 or more lots must
Can I correct you there? Sorry.
Yes?
It says it's if more than 2 lots. So obviously it's more than, so 3
That
or
serve
more.
more than 2 lots.
Okay, sorry.
Nope, no worries. All right. Land use zoning has been found by the board to apply to this application. See the board motion, October 20, 2021 regarding same. Specifically, 6B11(2) requires that private roads that serve more than 2 lots must meet street design and construction standards of section 5.14 of the subdivision ordinance. The Quarrying licensing ordinance section 6.2A2 requires that the owner and operator ensure the maintenance of all infrastructures, structures, and their sites. The easement provided by the applicant specifies the changes in maintenance must be approved by the subservient tenement, Mr. Musetti. As it is impractical to obtain Mr. Musetti's approval to repair and maintain the road from time to time ongoing, the applicant has not shown sufficient evidence of title, right, or interest.
And that's specific enough, James?
Yeah, I like it.
With the tying back to title, right, and interest.
Yeah.
Should she put that in parentheses at the end of her sentence?
Yeah. Yeah, should we put 61C? Is that what it was?
Yeah,
What's 61C?
it's, right title and interest.
I think I had that in at the end, didn't I?
No, if you put it in parentheses at the very end of her whole thing, it will fit in there.
Can you read just the last part of it, Heidi? I thought I had it there.
No, I do not have that in there. The easement provided by the applicant specifies the changes in maintenance must be approved by the subservient tenement, Mr. Musetti.
Right.
As it is impractical to obtain Mr. Musetti's approval to repair and maintain the road from time to time ongoing, the applicant has not shown sufficient evidence of title, right, or interest.
As is required by QLO Article 6, Section 6.1C.
Hold on. Article 6, Section,
6.1C is in Charlie, or cat.
all right.
I like it, Bill.
The question is, do you like it, Meredith?
Meredith like it.
I love it. And I'll sound so much more intelligent and wordy than I am.
Not wordy, just precise. I resemble that remark.
Why don't we actually refer to that easement by book and page specifically?
If you want to, yeah, I have it right here. I was just reading it a second ago.
And that rather than talking about, I think it would be much better if we said that permission had to be acquired from the fee landowner.
Well,
And
technically speaking, he's a subservient tenement.
I understand that.
If you want to say fee landowner, I can live with that.
I want to hear from Dave. So why that, Dave?
Well, that's how the owner of the property is referred to. They own the fee of the land.
Yeah. I'm not gonna argue with you. He wants that, it's good. I don't care.
Let's change that.
And I don't think we have to mention Musetti.
I don't think we need to mention
that. I think it's sufficient if we just reference that easement and say that, because tomorrow somebody else may own that property.
Sure.
Yeah,
That's a good point. Yeah, I have the thing here if you want it, Mr. Chairman. Yeah.
Well, she needs
all right, yes, so I need the book and page.
Yeah, you ready?
Yes.
Book 7146, page 329.
One more time.
One more time, Heidi, please.
The land use zoning ordinance has been found by the board to apply to this application. See board motion of October 20, 2021 regarding same. Specifically, 6B11(2) requires all private roads that serve more than 2 lots must meet street design and construction standards of section 5.14 of the subdivision ordinance. The quarrying licensing ordinance, section 62A2, requires that the owner and operator ensure the maintenance of all infrastructures, structures, and their sites. The easement, book 7146, page 329, provided by the applicant, specifies the changes in maintenance must be approved by the fee landowner. As it is impractical to obtain the fee landowner's approval to repair and maintain the road from time to time ongoing, the applicant has not shown sufficient evidence of title, right, and interest as is required by the Quarrying Licensing Ordinance, Article 6, section 61C.
Dave? How's that sound? You're muted.
Sounds good to me.
Meredith, how does that sound? You're on mute, Meredith.
I wasn't trying to talk. I was still thinking about it.
Christy, I can see you're unmuted.
Wheels are turning, Chrissy's the wheels are turning.
I had one comment, one question. Do we need to say in the first sentence where it says the land use zoning ordinance has been found by the board? Should we be more specific and say the Mount Desert Planning Board, or does board, is that sufficient?
More specific, the better.
Okay, so I would add Mount Desert Planning Board. The other question I had was, I heard it two different ways, but towards the end where we say the applicant has not shown sufficient evidence of title, right, or interest as is required by QLO, blah, blah. Is it title, right, and interest, or title, right, or interest? Is it or and?
You read it right from the ordinance, because traditionally it was right title and interest, but the ordinance says it different. I thought I was reading it right from the ordinance.
Which section?
Article 6, section 61C.
61C. Of the QLO?
Yes.
Yeah.
Evidence of title, right, or interest.
Or.
Title,
Okay.
right, or interest.
Okay, I heard and at one point, and then I heard or, so I just wanted to make sure we got that line.
You guys should be lawyers.
And then do we know that the, does the easement use the word maintenance or construction?
I'll tell you, I can tell you exactly what the easement says. I can find it.
I only asked because that sort of third paragraph where it says the easement provided by the applicant specifies that changes in, is that construction, maintenance? Like what is the right word there?
You have a copy of that, Ed?
I have one.
I got it. What it says is, grantee hereby agrees that its easement rights hereunder shall be subject to the following. Number 3, except for an emergency, grantee shall not undertake any construction or maintenance on the easement area without prior consent of grantor. Such consent not to be unreasonably withheld.
Okay, then I would recommend that we say construction or maintenance, that changes in construction or maintenance must be approved. Those are two different things with different definitions, and just to parallel it with the language in the easement. But other than that, I don't have any other comment.
I guess I'm still concerned with incorporating the subdivision ordinance into this. That I'd rather see it stand on the provisions specifically in this section of the quarry ordinance. They are required to be able to maintain all infrastructure and the fact that this easement says that we don't have to get into the subdivision, which I guess I'm worrying about it going to the courts and that tangling this just in a different argument about whether the subdivision ordinance applies. That we have here an argument against something that's fully within this section, that they're supposed to be able to maintain the infrastructure, and they have an easement that does not allow them to do what is required of the quarry ordinance.
So the reason that I added that, Meredith, was that because we discovered that there's more than 2 lots on here, and that the road had to be brought up to the regular standards in the land use ordinance, then that meant the road had to be changed. So that's why I wanted to make the reference in there, because otherwise, I'm pretty sure Mr. Bearer would be not right, but he would be more right than he is. That's possible, degrees of half pregnant. Because the road there wouldn't be an obligation to do as much to maintain it or to keep it in its fit or good state. Indeed, he could argue, not that he wouldn't anyways, but he could, that there was some sort of grandfathering on the road. But now, whereas it has to be brought up to the regular standards for a road because of the land use ordinance, its applicability, that means that there's a higher standard that has to be met. So it's much more likely, given that that standard is higher, that there's going to be needed to be ongoing maintenance and changes. That's why I wanted to bring it in. I think it's stronger that way, but I'm just trying to help.
Dave, you said something?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Thoughts, Meredith?
I get what James is saying too. In my mind, I had it sort of separated into 2 separate arguments, but I understand what he's saying as well.
I think they're all.
I get that they're overlapping, but I guess I'd rather see that it is sort of 2 motions. I guess if things aren't getting hacked away at, if they're separated into 2 motions,
I feel like they're all threaded together, Meredith. It's kind of like this pyramidal motion, you go here and this takes you to the next level and the next level and the next level. And if we don't have that all in the same motion, then we're going to lose like that thread of continuity with the motion.
And I guess that's beyond my realm of experience to say, if there's a road going into the quarry, this ordinance says they have a responsibility to maintain that. And if all of it is maintain the existing road, there still could be situations where the roads wash out and they could still use it, but it would start having negative impacts on other people. And it's their use of the damaged road that's having negative impact. So they have to hold some authority to maintain that road outside of the subdivision. The subdivision compounds it, but I guess I don't. But if James says that's a weak argument, that if it's an existing road, they don't have any responsibility to maintain it, even though they're using it and they only have an easement over it.
No, I don't say that they don't have any responsibility to maintain it. I'm saying it could be argued by Mr. Mayor that they have less of responsibility because the road's grandfathered as it was. So that's slightly different.
I think the importance of maintaining that road for a commercial activity becomes elevated. And I don't know that there's anything in the code that says, it'd be one thing if they were accessing house, but we're talking about accessing a commercial activity.
Oh, it's not.
Activity on. And so they have a real responsibility to that road.
It's not the commercial nature of it that elevates their responsibility the way I see it. What's elevated is because it accesses more than 2 or more lots. That's what makes it the elevated standards. This is ongoing. I've counted it a dozen or 2 dozen times with Kim on other roads in town once it's 2 or more lots, then it has to be built up to a higher standard.
Yes, we've gone over that many times.
Ad nauseam. I apologize, but the structure, the motion was typical of what you see in a whereas, now therefore. That's why it seems sort of odd. That's how I was thinking of it. And it does layer upon each other, just like when you do in an agreement or contract. Whereas this, whereas that, now therefore this.
I guess I guess I would have a motion to say that they're required to maintain bring the road up to subdivision standards, that was one motion, and then this, and separate the two, that if they attacked the idea that, this is an existing lot and they don't feel that they're the ones responsible to bring it up to subdivision standards, if they should pass that through a court, I want this issue of, yeah, but the easement is weak, to be in an independent motion, so that even if that gets whittled away at, this stands alone. And you could have one motion make the other motion stronger, but that the whole thing doesn't get shot down if they succeed in saying that they are not responsible to bring it up to subdivision standards.
Right. I agree with you that I just want to say that I agree with you that they do have a responsibility, whether they have to bring it up to land use ordinance standards. You keep saying subdivision, it's actually land use ordinance standards, which reference the subdivision. But whether they have to bring it up to the regular street design standards or not, they still have a duty to maintain. I agree with you on that.
And they don't have.
I'm just intellectually weak when it comes to being able to separate them. Bill's a lot smarter than I am.
I don't know, Meredith, I would, I don't know, I'm not feeling an urge to pull it apart.
Do you see your point? I see your point.
I do, I totally do. But again, I feel like all of the references and, are supporting each other, and we need all of those references in a single body of a single motion. Meredith, it's gonna get appealed anyhow.
I know it's going to get appealed, and therefore I don't want the issue of whether it needs to, that there are two issues here. And I think that the lack of a solid easement has its own solid ground to stand on, just knowing. Anyway, so I'd make it two motions, but that's up to the rest of the board.
Mr. Chairman, you could have the one motion you have, and then also have one that is just limited to 6.2A2.
Yeah, I was just writing that out. We could do, Meredith, we could do the motion that I proposed, and then have one, I just started to read it, and it would say something like, regardless of whether the applicant has a duty to meet the street design standards of the land use ordinance, comma, the applicant still has a duty to, and then repeat all the stuff. And because of repeat the whole thing. So it's the same motion, but it adds your thing, and then it's a backstop. So if the court comes along and says, well, hey, they didn't have to meet the standards of the street design standards, but they still had to maintain the road, that would help you. So that would be an additional motion, rather than a separate motion, Mr. Chairman.
The second one would be very short, James. It would just be the applicant has a requirement to maintain the road under 6.2A2, and he doesn't have that right under the easement.
Well, that's beautiful. You want to slow down so Heidi can get that? Go slow.
We're not gonna get in trouble with him suggesting.
No, I'm gonna suggest it right after he does.
Why don't you suggest it?
Why don't you suggest it, James?
Because I forgot what he said.
But James, he's not on. You need to be the one to suggest it.
You're
Yes.
town council.
Come on.
I started over a much longer one. Yeah, I make it even more simple, and I know Mr. Manning's gonna correct me, but the applicant has a duty
Hold on. Okay,
to maintain the road per section. Leave a blank there, Hattie.
6282.
6282.
6282. Yeah, of the QLO. But the applicant cannot fulfill that duty.
Hold on. Okay,
Because of the limitations of the aforementioned easement. That's good. Now, this motion has to come after the previous motion. You do the first motion, and then you can do that. You cut right to it like Mr. Manahan wants to do, but you cut right to it because you got the other one. But you gotta do them first.
So Meredith, it sounds like you own the first motion.
She owns the second one too. So both of them are her idea.
Is there a second to Meredith's first motion?
Dave Ashmore, I second it.
Any further discussion?
okay, wait a minute.
Yeah,
We've got Meredith's motion on the first one, the longer one,
the longer
and
one.
Dave has seconded.
And
Okay,
Dave has seconded
just
it.
making sure I'm with you guys.
Any further discussion? None heard. I'm gonna call the vote. All those in favor? Tracy?
Tracy Keller, I.
Christie?
Anastasia, I.
Meredith?
Randolph, I.
Dave?
Dave Ashmore, aye.
And myself, William Hanley, aye.
You wanna read how do you read the second motion? This is definitely Meredith's.
Yes, no?
Please.
The applicant has a duty to maintain the road per section 6.2A2 of the Quarrying Licensing Ordinance, but the applicant cannot fulfill that duty because of the limitations of the aforementioned easement.
I like it.
Mhm.
Can I make a suggestion to that motion?
Please.
I just think that we should replace where it says the applicant has a duty to maintain the road. Should we be more specific like we were in the first motion and say the applicant has a duty to ensure the maintenance of all infrastructure, structures, and their sites per section 6.2 sub? Should we just parallel that language so it's not so vague?
Normally, I would agree with you, but
We just
because it was
said-
already in the first motion, see what I mean? The answer is yes.
But does that link the two motions? Like if
No,
one is sort of a subservient to the other one, or is it okay?
no.
It'll
I think
still
it's
stand
okay,
alone.
because think about it, if you were reading it afterwards, right? You're gonna read the first motion. And then you're gonna read the second motion. And you'll understand the second motion because all the language in the first.
I don't
But
see
if you
any,
want to,
I don't see any problem with doing what Christie, I think it's just simply makes it stronger and I don't see any.
it's your motion, Meredith, so go for it.
Okay, I prefer Christie's wording.
It's your wording now.
So I think that, do you have it, Meredith?
I don't have my book open right at the moment.
Yeah, I think it becomes, the applicant has a duty to ensure the maintenance of all infrastructures, structures.
Hold on.
Oh,
Of all structures,
And their sites.
is it structures, infrastructures? That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Of all infrastructures / or comma, structures and their sites. Per section 6.2A2.
No. 6.2A2?
Yes.
Yes,
6.2
you're right, you're right. Yeah,
of the QLO. But the applicant cannot fulfill that duty because of the limitations of the aforementioned easement.
I've got it, so you want to read it? Should I read it again? Okay.
please.
The applicant has a duty to ensure the maintenance of all infrastructures, structures, and their sites per section 6.2A2 of the Quarrying Licensing Ordinance, but the applicant cannot fulfill that duty because of the limitations of the aforementioned easement.
I mean, I don't think we need a EG road, like we're talking about the road. Were you gonna make that motion, Meredith?
I can, or you can.
I so move.
I will second it.
Okay, any further discussion? None heard, I'll call the vote. All those in favor, Christie,
Anastasia, I.
Meredith,
Randolph, I.
Dave,
Dave Ashmore, aye.
Tracy,
Tracy Keller, aye.
myself, William Hanley, aye. Eight years. 12,
yeah, I think it's 12.
yeah.
So traditionally,
For me, it's been 8.
traditionally, what you would do now is you would make a motion to deny because the standards of this and this were not met by the aforementioned motions. However, you could also make any other motions you want on any other part of it. I guess the problem with the trend in court cases, I guess I just stopped reading them because they're upsetting, but the trend in court cases is they want as much as possible. So if you have more reasons to deny, you should get them all out now. The theory being, if you went off to court, then the court could say, well, these reasons are stupid, and send it back, and you would have dealt with them. If this is the reason, these two motions, then you have no others. Now, there's another thing that Mr. Bear and Mr. Manahan and Mr. Pelleggi might want to weigh in on. There's a theory that you should go ahead and do all the findings of fact and conclusions of law. So that then the court will have a complete record to look at. What do you want to do, Ed?
I think that the board's already made their checklist is completed.
The only thing I think we're missing is the stuff around performance guarantees. I don't think we did anything on that.
Yep, the reclamation section.
The reclamation performance guarantees.
Why would we do that?
And I don't think you would. Is there anything else? Was there something in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the checklist and like section 2.4 applicability, didn't really have anything entered on the checklist.
So I think the safest thing to do with Mr. Bear, Manahan's, and Pelleggi and Kate's approval, I think the safest thing to do would be to go through your checklist quickly, make sure you've got it filled out. I think it's more or less done. Skip the part about the performance guarantees, and then, once you've done that, then go for an overall motion.
But the problem with that, the problem with that is, tonight, we talked about how it doesn't meet the stormwater standards. The board already found that it met the stormwater standards, but the new information that came in tonight brings it into question. And I think to do that, you're gonna need to have a big discussion on whether this meets the stormwater standards.
No. What I said, you missed the first part. What I said is, unless you have some other reasons that you want to deny it for. And that would mean you want to go back and revisit all that nonsense.
But you're suggesting that if they don't revisit the stormwater, they can just go ahead with what they already did. But
Sure.
what I'm saying is they had asked for new submissions 30 days ago, and that opened up.
Oh, that's an argument
That opened
you
up a
can
whole
make
new
in
can of
court.
worms here.
Yeah, well, you think it did, but you can make that argument.
Well, the other issue
that
is,
should-
yeah, just a second.
No, not the applicant. You're
Well,
looking-
I'm still speaking, Ed.
Hey,
You interrupted
hey.
me.
Mr. Manhan finished, and then Ed, you're up.
The other point is the performance guarantees, which has not been found, and we would strongly urge the board to find that the performance guarantee that was submitted was not adequate. And so we don't think you should just adopt the standards on that point.
Was there a performance guarantee submitted?
There was one that says that at some point, we, the bank, may be willing to issue a letter of credit, but that was not issued, and the ordinance requires a letter of credit to be issued.
So on approval, we would get a letter of credit, we would get an applicant to obtain approval. And this board decided to go down that road, so the technical stuff about the road, and the stormwater use, and let's talk about this, and we did.
Yeah.
And the evidence, I think that it's pretty clear that the stormwater hasn't been altered.
What I'm saying is you don't need to go there. You've made a decision to deny it, and you can just deny on that basis.
James, I'm not feeling the checklist.
Okay.
Here.
I can live with that.
I don't know how the board feels about that, Christie.
I guess,
It sounds like we were gonna make a list of reasons, but it didn't sound like we had to go through every factor and address it, is what I thought we were gonna do.
that's not what I'm saying.
We've already done.
No, we've already done that.
Yeah. All I'm saying is if you're gonna deny it for any more reasons other than the ones you just made the motion on, if there's any other reasons you want to deny it, add those in. Because the trend in the case law is for the court to say, listen, if you had 3 reasons to deny, tell us all of them. So we can deal with them all at the same time, rather than deal with them and then deal with them later. What the court's afraid of is you do one reason to deny, then the court throws it out. Then it comes back to you. You find, like Mr. Manahan's been going on about something about the stormwater you want to revisit. And then you throw it out on that, it goes to the court throws that out too. So what the court is saying is if you have more than one reason to deny it for several reasons if you want to, and then give it to us, so we can talk about all of them at once.
James, doesn't that come up when the board stops short of going through all of the review criteria? And let's say they stop at the first one and there are 16.
Right, go ahead with that. That's good.
And the court would then say, well, the board has to act on the other 15 criteria, but this board has done all of that.
Okay. Well, assuming you believe that Mr. Manahan's wrong, they've done all that.
It sounds to me like, what do we want to do about stormwater, Jim? Seems
So,
like it relates to the
James,
road.
this is the perpetual motion machine I was referring to. Like, we're gonna go and peel the stormwater now after, that's what I was saying.
Listen, Mr. Chairman, I just
Yeah.
advise you, if you're ready to move on, let's move on. Nobody seems to have a burning objection to doing what you're suggesting anyways.
Just to be clear, Mr. Bear seems to be suggesting you've approved the application but for TRI, and that's not the case. You haven't approved everything, you've gone through some standards, so.
They've gone through every standard.
Right, but they haven't approved those as, they haven't approved, for example, stormwater, they haven't approved financial assurance.
To be precise,
I'm pretty sure that was stormwater map.
they're just gonna move to deny the whole thing, which meant, that means they haven't approved anything. They've just moved to deny.
How could they do that after all these votes, James?
They're preliminary.
5-0. What do you mean they're preliminary? These aren't preliminary votes. We spent a lot of time on these maps.
We did.
Nobody thought these were preliminary maps.
There's a very complete checklist that we've been populating over the last 8 years. And
But that assumed nothing would change, and clearly, in the last 30 days, some very significant changes have been made. And we raised the point that those significant changes show that they haven't met the stormwater standard. And so,
yeah, but the board hasn't found that.
exactly, and that's, so what Mr. Collier suggested would require the board to have a full discussion of the stormwater standard.
No,
What if the board doesn't want to?
no,
The board doesn't want to.
I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm suggesting is, if there were any other reasons to deny, speak now or forever hold your peace. And I don't think there is, but that's up to the board.
Along that line of thinking, I don't know if we were going down the route that we had approved each section. I think that there's worth an overall discussion, as I mentioned before, because I think it was very difficult to run this through as an existing activity when the activities are all, what they specifically are planning on doing is a new activity to this site in recent years, although they argue that the quarry existed. But the point of the purpose of the ordinance, the quarry ordinance, is to preserve the town's natural resources, property values, and their future ability to be assets to the town and its residents. And I guess I don't feel that the ordinance has enabled us to offer those, following step by step through the ordinance, that we've been very well able, particularly on the issue of sound. We've just never been able to offer any level of protection to the residents or the town. And the impact that that would have on our most valuable asset sitting here on Mount Desert Island in the middle of Acadia National Park is our natural resources. And I just, we, on the limitations of the ordinance, we approved the noise, but I don't feel at all that we've provided the town or its residents any protection. We don't know how much noise they're going to make. There's a little security that they're going to be protected from soils. And so I feel like the overall ordinance recognizes that that is what we're here to do. And I would hope that there was some legal standard for us to say, you know, that we don't know, we haven't offered any protections, and that's what our responsibility is to do.
Meredith, what I was kind of, I mean, before the hearing tonight, before every hearing, I tried to get a game plan of where it may go, and sometimes it goes there and many times it doesn't. And one of the things I was planning on tonight is that, yes, we were going to probably, have a healthy discussion on the whole road thing and drill down through it. And if we got through that, then, I think the next task on hand was, we needed to go back through our checklist and just kind of, assess where we were at with that. And if there were any holes we needed to fill in prior to our final vote on the whole thing, then we probably should. Well, I think based upon the two motions we just approved, that just totally cut that process off. And here we are.
But I understand what James.
So, one last thing, and absolutely the bigger picture discussion about whatever we needed to discuss in the final deliberation of the application, which we were in, then would then happen. But again, I think we just stopped the process.
I think James is telling us that we don't have to stop the process, that if we want the strongest legal ground so that we don't get our case overturned again, is that we should out, if we have any thoughts that there are reasons why we still wouldn't have approved this application. And I still feel like, you know, when it came to the end, could I, in good conscience, allow, not knowing how much noise we're going to be imposing on the neighbors of this quarry? I think that's what the job of the board is. And I feel like somewhere in there, we've got to have some, the ordinance didn't provide us the grounds for which to push forward on that, but this isn't existing noise. And what we're being asked to review it as if all this noise and all this activity has been going on all this time, and it hasn't. It's new equipment.
Sorry, Mayor, but I think you're stuck on that, because in reading through the decision.
We had a decision on noise.
I know, but there was more.
We had a decision on noise because of the way that the ordinance is written.
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is the decision of Judge Duddy. And what he said was, on remand, the question for the planning board is whether under section 6.1 of the QLO as discussed herein, and without reference to the non-conforming use and grandfathering provisions of the LUZO, McQuinn is eligible for a quarrying license for any active unlicensed quarry activity. So whether you think it's new or not, the judge told us to look at it as an existing quarrying activity. So we're bound by what the judge told us to do.
Dave's got his hand up here. I want to hear from him too.
I didn't mean to put my hand up.
That's the
You got it
from the computer.
No.
But now that I'm talking, I'll talk. I agree wholeheartedly with what Meredith is saying, but I also recognize what James is saying is probably being what we're faced with. But that doesn't mean I'm totally in favor of going back through the checklist. I certainly don't want to do it tonight. I've had about enough already.
Mr. Chairman, we're done. Sorry,
Yeah.
sure. And that checklist, I don't know how you could alter the checklist. There were findings made, evidence presented, votes taken. Listening to Meredith describe the purpose section and only read half of it out of the ordinance, that's not a standard. You may view that when you interpret the standards, but that's not a standard. We've been through this, and there are concessions, great concessions that were made by the applicant on the issue of noise, for example. So it's not like there is no protection out there for people. There's many of them. And you know, our primary argument was that was void for vagueness to begin with. So those concessions are I think, very, very important. But more importantly, you've done this. It's taken us 3 or 4 years to get through this. The last substantive meeting we had was 15 months ago. Nothing's changed. There's no new evidence. Even Mr. Manahan and his experts had opportunities to comment on noise. So please, can we just move forward?
Mr. Chairman, can I just respond to that?
I want to get in before he responds, because I'm not suggesting that we go through the whole thing and look at each standard. All I'm saying is, those are the reasons we had tonight. I only see 2 other things that the board really needs to look at if they wanted to do this. They don't have to. And those 2 things would be the suggestion, I don't know if it's right or wrong, that the building the road would change the runoff of the whatever they call it, for the groundwater for the whole site. That's one thing. Should that be relooked at? Yes or no? Secondly, the conformance, the performance thing, the performance one, and I think you're right. I think we can ignore that. So we're down to really one thing. Does the board, in my opinion, does the board want to revisit anything about the runoff so that it can deny it on that basis too? That's the only thing I think the board needs to do. I disagree with Dave. I don't think you should go through the whole checklist.
So we don't, if I can just quickly explain, you don't need to go through the whole checklist. I think Mr. Collier has a point. It might make sense to articulate another reason for disapproval if you're so inclined to do that. And I would say with respect to what Ms. Randolph says, that 6.1J specifically requires estimated levels of noise at the property line. The applicant has never provided you that ordinance requirement.
No, we did that.
No,
We did that. That's over.
There's tons of that.
No, you didn't do it.
So let's-
Oh, we're finished with it.
So let's-
Can I just, why do you have to interrupt me? Because I'm trying to address Ms. Randolph's Meredith's point, which is she said there should be something in the ordinance that addresses her concern and Mr. Ashmore's concern about noise. And I think she needs to understand that there is a provision that has never been addressed by the applicant. I understand, James and Ed, that you think that the board has done that, but we're hearing board members who say that they don't agree with that. And there's a provision in the ordinance that has never been addressed.
All sorts of noise measurements taken at the property lines, Matt, all sorts.
You never provided that.
So
Yes, we did. You weren't here in August of 2020.
let's stop for a second. I'm with Dave. I can't handle any more tonight. I mean, my head is done. Let's get a game plan here with the board. If we're gonna, have a continued discussion, we're gonna leave it here. What are we doing? Dave? Thoughts?
James told us a long time ago that we could go back and review any section that we've ruled on. And
Yeah.
I want to go back and review the noise section. And specifically, I wouldn't mind going through the checklist to see as a group if we're all still comfortable with what we found.
You don't have the same numbers anymore.
Christie, thoughts?
I guess I think that the application has a totality to it that's greater than any one piece that we chunked out. So, we chunked out noise, we chunked out the noise, we chunked out all these other pieces, but we never kind of took it from the top and did the totality of it. If doing that makes a stronger case for it, I think we should look at the totality. If the motions we just put forward is what we're going to deny the application on, I mean, that's one path. I mean, I guess I feel like whichever path we do, I'm guessing there's going to be an appeal. And so like, what kind of paper record are we making for the appeal, and what will be the best service to the town in terms of like what Meredith spoke of, protecting the town? I don't know that because I'm not a lawyer, but I always thought we were going to look at the totality and not just piece by piece by piece and consider it done, but look at it all together.
There's a provision in the ordinance for that? Totality?
Let's get to whatever everybody else thinks.
What do you think, Tracy?
One question I have is, if we use just this document, our checklist, how long will that take us?
But I'm not suggesting you go through all the standards again. That's done. All I was suggesting was, I wanted to do it 30 seconds. Look through it, see if there's anything else that you also want to deny it on. And that's it, done. But Meredith and Mr. Ashmore want to go back and revisit stuff. I mean, I think that's not a good idea, but.
Hey, Bill,
Yeah.
what happens when you go through this checklist and you have members that are no longer here that made motions and voted on?
I know.
You got two board members that are no longer on this board that
Yeah, I was
Are
seeing,
in this checklist
I was
that
seeing,
also make decisions.
no, that's a really good point. And, you know, as I was going through this and just kind of seeing where we're at, I mean, Dennis and
Yeah, Dennis Kiley and Joanne Eaton.
and Joanne Eaton are obviously here.
Damn them for leaving.
Is
You know, it-
Christie's point about totality, is there any discussion of the totality of all of these? Is there a possibility of voting for each section that we've agreed to it and then saying, despite achieving each of the individual sections, we still don't think that this is a good choice for the town?
that sounds like we're just gonna be throwing mud in the water if we do that. I think relative to, you know, the context I think of it when Christie talks about totality of what we did is, you know, how is it relative to the mission of the planning board? You know, did we, you know, based on everything presented to us, you know, are we doing what we need to do for the good of the town relative to that specific mission statement in the land use ordinance of the planning board's duties? You know, that's totality to me.
That's a workshop though.
Yeah.
That's a post-application workshop.
Mhm. You know, the checklist for me, I mean, just being an administrator of process, I was just looking at the checklist to where we had holes. We just hadn't had, there's just no information on it. And there were a couple sections, you know, there was, you know, section 2.4 applicability, there was 2.6 types of quarrying activities prohibited. For some reason, I don't know why the blasting section wasn't filled in. I mean, we talked about that. Yeah, yeah, I mean, there is no blasting, but why isn't it mentioned in the checklist? And then, just like what James is saying at the end of the checklist, section 7, there's all these performance guarantees. Yes, we had touched upon some of that in previous deliberations and had findings on that, but I didn't see it, you know, make its way into the checklist. So, you know, I thought there was like just some general housekeeping we needed to do to tighten things up. And then if we got there then and the final motion was made, then, you know, we had a whole laundry list of permit conditions and all that fun stuff to wade through too, so.
No, but I think that you only do, the thing that Ed was talking about, and I agree with him 100%. You only do the performance guarantees if you approve, and you only do the conditions if you approve. Otherwise, you don't do them.
Right, so that's what I'm getting at. I don't see what doing that is gonna gain us at this point. And Dan, you've had your hand up.
Thank you. I was trying to approach this a little differently. I have a question for the board. Has the board made a finding that the applicant with the revised road construction has still met its burden relating to stormwater and erosion control?
That's
what Mr. Bear is gonna argue.
Yeah.
And I'm asking the board, you tell me what the answer is so that the record's clear, so that I know what I'm supposed to do after this.
That's the only issue I think is left, myself. I think that's the only issue that's left.
Dave?
I don't think we've got an answer to Christie's question, and I have that same question. I'm sure Meredith does too. I don't, is there a point in time where we end up voting on the totality of everything we've done?
That's new territory. I don't know what to say to that. I mean,
The short answer is yes, but you do it in this way.
Yeah.
For example, you could do it in 5 seconds. You could say, because the standard of whatever was in the motion has not been met, the application is hereby, it should be denied. And then you voted on the totality because it's been denied. But the idea of voting on the totality in some Zen-like holistic way, the answer is no, that's just not done that way. Even if you're gonna look at something like in the way I think Meredith was driving at, what you end up doing is you reference, if you're looking at it holistically, you reference specifics. So you might say, our job was in the preamble to protect the such and such. That has not been met because of certain evidence. But you just don't look at it overall and go, we don't like it. You don't do that.
It's been 9 years.
So the overall vote, I think, could be denied. Boom. And I think the only issue with standing, I hate to be repetitive, but is Mr. Pelleggi pointed it. I think that's the only one left. There's one issue. And you don't even have to deal with it if you don't want to. If you don't want to look at that because you found another reason to deny, you could. You could just deny on that one. Oh, no.
So it's 8:45. I don't think we're gonna get much traction to go anywhere in 15 minutes. We've got we've throwing out a couple things. We've got a regular hearing next Wednesday too.
And then after that.
And the one after that. I mean, I'm getting the sense from the board that, you know, this isn't it, but we're close, and you guys want to just discuss, process, make some findings where the board feels like they need to, but that's going to mean another hearing.
So let's, the question of how long, Tracy asked how long it would take. And I guess there certainly is asking the request for people to come back if we, I guess the problem is, you know, 15 minutes, can we get, it seems like we're not sure that we don't want to dive into this right now. Then we're asking everybody to come back again. But if this was simply a board discussion, you know, so that all the lawyers don't have to come back, that it's just the board discussing it, it can be broadcast on Zoom so that it doesn't become the burden of quite the meetings that, you know, yet another whole meeting and all the lawyers convening. And I don't know, is that a possibility?
I mean,
No, James is saying.
No. You can't exclude the lawyers,
no,
unfortunately.
I mean.
No, they could but just so that they could be there by Zoom rather than, because it wouldn't be accepting any more information. It'd just be an opportunity for the board to discuss things. There wouldn't be the need for all the expense of bringing all the lawyers traveling and everything. I'm just trying to minimize, and I'm just throwing ideas out there.
Right. Well, what I want you to do, if you could, do with the board's permission, with the chair's permission, is I think you've got a binary choice at this point, the way I see it. Let me tell you the two choices that I see. Choice number one, vote right here and now to deny because the standard mentioned in the motion wasn't met. That's choice number one. You can do it before the next 2 minutes. Choice number two, stop and say, there are other reasons to deny. And tell me what that is. The only possible one that I think you haven't looked at is stormwater. But the problem with that, if you want to go down that slippery slope, Mr. Manahan and Mr. Bear and everybody else is want to get new information in on how the road affects the storm management plan for the entire site. When I'm not suggesting you do that, my suggestion is you just stick with number one. I wanted to make you aware, and obviously I was dumb to say it, that the preferred methodology, the trend in the courts is to do all methods of denial. But if there's no other reasons to denial, my advice to you is to make your motion to deny the whole thing, do it right now, get it over with. And let this go off to the Board of Appeals. Then you can work out stormwater if it comes back to you later.
We've also, or I speak for myself, I mean, I've also sat here for 8 years and just making a decision and walking away. I mean, I feel like there's some more due diligence that we as a board could pull together to close this. That's where the board thinks we should go.
I think it's also because we made the decision once and it got overturned. And I thought we had a really solid decision. So it's hard to walk away and not want to have it a little better reinforced because.
You know, I think that's been the guiding light, Meredith, of it coming back to us. I think we have been every single section we've reviewed. I think we've been incredibly diligent and thorough in the process and the review of those sections. You know, and I would hope that any kind of final decision on this application has that kind of thoroughness to it. You know, but then I want to just caution the board too that, you know, we're not opening up some esoteric can of worms, or we're just discussing this and that. You know, we got to have some marching orders to that effort.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Christy.
I was just gonna say, I agree with that. I feel like I don't want to open up the can of worms, but I do feel like there are some strings loose. And I don't know exactly what they are, but like when I look at stormwater management, like I get that we went through it. I get that we said the standard was met, and I get that people who are no longer on the board voted on that. But there is new information about stormwater management because when that was analyzed, it didn't include what we now know needs to happen to and with the access road. So it wasn't a full analysis. And I would say the same is true of erosion. Now, I think that can be fixed with, I don't know what the legal term is, an addendum or something like that, that like the storm water management piece related to the road, you know, because that is new information. So I feel like we're kind of, if we're going to put all our eggs in the basket of this piece about just denying it based on these two motions, we still are kind of leaving an incomplete checklist. And I'm not talking about like the performance and all that sort of stuff that you do if you were to approve it, but we have areas that are empty and we have areas that don't include the analysis of this, you know, 11th hour information. I feel like we're all probably really tired and we're probably inclined to have closure on this, but I think there's just a little bit more of a lift that needs to be very tightly facilitated and time limited. But I feel like we haven't quite crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's on this that we're capable of. But that's not the sword I'm going to die on. That's just how I'm feeling.
Dan, did you have your hand up?
I was yawning, I'm sorry.
That's a heck of a yawn if I can see it through the mask. Dave, any thoughts?
I agree with Christie.
Mhm.
I think that she pretty well summed up how I feel.
So it sounds like we're aiming at another hearing.
Oh, yeah, and maybe 2 or 3, because if you go to another hearing, from what she's saying, Christie's saying, or maybe we should ask her, Christie, do you wanna let them get new evidence in?
No, I don't think we need to do that. I think we just need to be complete in our analysis, especially where there's just this little piece of new information that we already have. We don't need any new evidence. We just need to complete our analysis.
Christie, keep in mind too, and I mean, it's obvious, we all know it, but we do have an obligation to the town to be as, to expedite and be as productive as we can in this process. And, you know, I want to make sure too that, you know, we're not being called before the Board of Selectmen or anybody questioning why we got to this point, but yet continued. So if we do continue, all I'm getting at is that this has got to be a condensed, final, I would hope expedited and quick process, but yet thorough.
And what I'm trying to say is if you start talking about stormwater management,
Yeah.
Mr. Manahan wanna get something in, and then Mr. Barrow will wanna rebut it.
No, we won't. Let me just say, we won't. We don't want to submit any more evidence. In fact, we don't think that that should be allowed because it was after the 30-day limit you already set. We think.
Well, there, you know, those are all points that I think that the board has definitely heard. And if we get to a discussion about that, I think that's gonna be a point that we're going to be touching upon is the submittal issue. But, you know, but again, I would foresee that if we have another hearing and we're drilling down through things to substantiate a position on all of this, that's the primary goal. I mean, again, it's not an esoteric deep dive into this or that, but, you know, look, let's try to strengthen where we're at as best we can and as productively as we can.
Now I'm raising my hand.
Yes.
The board, the chair closed the public meeting and what I'm hearing is we accept that.
Mhm.
I'm just asking the board to make some findings on some stuff that's been raised by the new submissions.
Mhm.
That doesn't involve any of us as board discussion.
I'm with you there, and I would not expect it to.
I don't think that you can analyze, the board members can analyze all of the stormwater information that's in the record, unless you've got it in front of you, every one of you. Because we did that, what year did we do that? 2018, 17? So you gotta go back and look at all of that. You've gotta take into consideration what you've heard tonight, in addition to all of that, before you can make any further findings if you choose to do that. It's not a matter of just getting together and saying, oh, I think that Mr. Haskell did a better job, so we win.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about.
Well,
You gotta have that entire record on stormwater in front of you.
It's, I think without quantifying it further, that's what I'm trying to say is that, you know, we have a decision on stormwater. We had, you know, we gotta be mindful of that, you know, that, we're not just unnecessarily extending the process and discussion. If we're drilling down through multiple reasons to deny, then, okay, we got a submission issue. Okay, we've got, we've referenced a letter from TRC saying, hey, look, this, based on, the board is in agreement, specifically that the road design didn't meet this, we're not going back and opening up our decision from God knows when, but, we just need to be mindful of that if we go there.
I feel like when I think about going back to like stormwater and erosion for example, because those closely relate to this road issue. I'm not even sure when I say, it's not that we have to analyze the stormwater issue or the erosion issue. It's almost like we just have to write something down that says like, they almost don't apply to the road issue because it's superseded by the easement issue. And that's what I mean by like just wrapping it up a little bit more. Like if the road doesn't meet the standard and we're not going to approve it on the road, we don't have to analyze the road in terms of stormwater and erosion. But I just feel like we haven't gone back through the application in terms of the totality and made sure that it's like completely fleshed out. Like what you said, Bill, like the blasting section isn't even filled out. I mean, that's just like a clerical thing that we didn't fill it out. I remember us talking about it and that it wasn't going to happen, but we didn't fill out the checklist.
You don't need to. There's no requirement to do that.
Mhm.
You could, but there's no requirement to do that.
At this point.
No, yeah, at this point.
I think in you know, if we weren't at this point and we were still moving forward with wrapping up the review of this, it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I agree, 100%, yeah. But you're not going to approve, you're going to deny. So all you really have to do extra is see if there are any other reasons to deny. That's it. Everything else is superfluous.
So in terms of the process, we're just going to say like, there's this checklist and if you can't check a box, then you just stop and you deny and you list your reason for denying.
Yeah.
But that's not spelled out in the QLO. I mean, is that like a, where does the direction for that process come from?
I hate to say this because it's gonna jump all over me. 2 decades of practicing zoning law. If you're gonna deny, you deny and state your reasons for denial. That's just how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't go through and say, there's 83 reasons to approve, here's all the paperwork, but 84 we're denying on. What you do.
So then I guess maybe then I don't know that I'm ready at this point in the evening, in the day, to even know if there are any other reasons to deny. I mean, I feel like the first two motions that we did are very strong reasons. I'm not quite sure if there are other reasons or not. That is a question for which I do not have an answer at this time of the evening.
I think that's legitimate, because if there were other things, I'd like to get them on the list, so that if you were wrong in denying for reason 2 or 3, then the court could say, well, you know, that first one, you were wrong about that, so I'm gonna throw that out. That second reason, however, you're right about that, and therefore the thing is denied. So if you don't get all of the reasons in there and the court throws out one, then you don't get your shot at the second one. What would be really unfortunate, and the reason that they do that, is so that if you deny on the issue like you did tonight, then you have another reason later on that you could have done now. It would be an awful waste of time to go back all the way up to the court, and the court to say, oh, that one's stupid too, you shouldn't have denied on that one either. That's what I'm saying, get it out of the way now. But you don't
And that's
to.
where, in terms of being efficient, in terms of our roles and who we respond to, it seems like this is not the right time to just be like, yeah, we're done. Like, we're done, you know, and like kind of do it in a shoddy way. I mean, I don't know if there's another reason to deny, but I don't feel like we've had that conversation.
Then I guess you have to have another meeting, bring all the lawyers back, go through it again.
I mean, other people can weigh in. I don't even know if I'm making sense right now, but.
Oh, yeah, I think you are.
I agree with everything. And I guess I guess I would hope that it would be lighter, just that we do have the Zoom option these days, that if it is really a big deal for anybody to make it back to the town hall, that you do have the option of participating by Zoom, because this will just be a board discussion.
So do we continue to a date certain, or what do we do?
Can you get a date certain?
No,
Usually you have been unable to.
we're gonna have to do a Zoom or a Zoom doodle poll.
Yeah. I'm happy with what Meredith said, though. I think that's an excellent point, shouldn't be forgotten. That because it's a public hearing and there's no new evidence being submitted, that there's no need for Mr. Manahan or Mr. Pelleggi or Mr. Bear to travel. Or me. It's a long way from Bar Harbor. I mean, it's 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
Say that again, Dan.
Yeah, I don't have a problem. From my perspective, I think that it would be okay to just put this on a regular board agenda for a regular meeting, just add it to your agenda.
Yeah, do it by Zoom, eh? You don't have to show up. I mean, we like you, Dan, but
Due
we
to
like
the
you,
pol-
but,
our policy, it has to be available in person and,
yeah. So you can show up if you want to, but you don't have to.
so we could do the first meeting in February because the other ones are already past the time and they're already booked. We've got a lot of stuff on ours.
Do we have it?
I don't know, I need a calendar. What's the second Wednesday in February?
February 9th.
Okay. February 9th. Is that right?
That works, thank you.
We don't have anything for that hearing yet.
Submission deadline isn't here yet,
Yeah.
no.
Well, no submissions.
That was 2nd February?
Night.
Yeah,
The ninth.
there are no
That's a regular night.
submissions.
It's a regular.
I'm just
night.
thinking February's warrant committee.
Oh, and I know, well, that's
So
why
there's
I
a whole
was
lot of
saying,
extra
that's a
meetings.
good suggestion, having it on a regular, because we have a special
We can
town
work
meeting,
around.
and we have a lot of meetings coming up.
Yeah, because I think the warrant committee is gonna
Yeah.
come before us.
It almost doubles select board schedule.
So a regular meeting would be great.
So how about February 9th? Does that work?
February 9th.
Is it a continuation or a workshop?
Continuation.
It's a continuation.
All right.
I'll get a pledge to be done that night. Just a pledge.
Could it-
Doesn't know. Can we agree that that'll be the last meeting?
Can we work,
Inshallah.
and am I allowed to say that? Can we all aim for that to be the last meeting?
We can certainly hope that that's the last meeting. I don't know that we can guarantee that. I mean, God knows with this thing.
Can we just aim at it?
I mean, I think it's very concise. I mean, the goal is, what if any other motions or other reasons do we have to deny this in addition to the ones that we talked about tonight? I mean, that's a pretty tight, singular workshop
Succinct.
discussion.
Yeah.
Succinct. Yeah.
Yeah.
We just nobody gets to go down any bunny trails or rip off any scabs or,
No rabbit holes, no, just,
This is not a public hearing?
Right. Not a public hearing. Yeah.
Stormwater going to be discussed, because if it is, I'd like the whole record to be available.
what do you mean?
Is stormwater going to be one of those things?
Could be.
Then I think the record of stormwater needs to be in.
Well, it's in, I mean, what are you thinking in particular
I
when you
think
say the
board
record?
if we told the board members, I don't think that many of them can tell us the details of the stormwater management plans that were presented before, and to incorporate those into the plan for the road and come to a conclusion about whether it's being met or not. They've got to go back and look at all that stuff.
Yeah,
How can they just say, oh, yes, it is reviewed?
yeah, but have they done that?
Because the applicant hasn't satisfied their burden, that's the reason.
No.
Because they're proposing changes.
But I just want to know whether if you ask Christie, if you can ask Christie and Meredith and ask everybody if they've done that.
So this discussion was begun simply by Mr. Bear asking if we could pledge to make it the last meeting. And we're going off on another tangent.
So we're gonna aim for it to be the last meeting.
I don't think it's a tangent, because what he's saying is, if you want to vote to deny based on the fact that there's not enough evidence submitted on the effect of the stormwater by the being changed, stormwater pattern being changed by the new road being built the way it's going to be built, then you have to know about the stormwater plan for the entire lot. And all it is saying is, what was the stormwater plan for the entire lot? And they have all of the members been privy to that. And so there's no new evidence, Dan, it's just You see what I mean? Is you're gonna vote to deny on that basis, you gotta know what the whole stormwater plan.
Well, look, you guys have a record, the board has a record.
Yeah.
When we have new members, they have to come in here and they've got to swear that they read it.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to ask them.
Could I finish?
Mhm.
And that they're familiar with all of it. I don't disagree with Mr. Bear that analysis of the stormwater plan means analysis of the stormwater plan, whether it changes, of course it does. But to say, well, you better put the stormwater plan in, it's already there, you have it.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's been years, and with all due respect, I don't think that you get a flavor of it by listening to tapes or that stuff, but that's the record.
No,
Do
I
whatever you
spent
want to
a
make the decision.
number of hours,
It can't
couple
possibly be
days
the number of hours
going
we want.
through no, but I did spend maybe 2 days or so worth of time in the room reviewing the record. I did review the stormwater documents. I don't remember them exactly right now, but I did review them.
And that's more my point, it is, what does anybody on the board remember of them now? But make your decision, that's fine, you do it, make it the way you're gonna make it.
So
Just follow them in.
it sounds like we're continuing this to February 9th.
Do you need that as a motion?
Yes.
Do you have any preference on the agenda where this is gonna be placed if we get applications for other items? Because if this is gonna take a while, then you're probably not gonna get to other applications. So, or am I just putting this only on the February 9th meeting?
Sucks all the air in the room.
Yeah, let's leave it as the only thing on the agenda.
Let's put it on the only thing on the.
Works for me.
I mean,
So I make a motion that we continue this meeting to February 9th at 6 o'clock.
second. Hang on.
Tracy Keller, I'll second that.
Any further discussion? None heard, I'll call the vote. All those in favor, Meredith,
Randolph, aye.
Tracy,
Tracy Keller, aye.
Christie,
Anastasia, I.
Dave,
Dave Ashmore, aye.
myself, William Hanley, aye. There you go.
Motion adjourned.
I don't think we technically.
Oh, it's already right to continue, yeah. So, yeah,